Okay, so we are live.
Jake, how
Thank
are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks
Yes,
for joining me
yes.
on tonight.
Appreciate being on your channel. Thank you very much. This is gonna be a fun discussion.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm looking forward to talking. I always love bringing new people on, so I really appreciate you coming on. Um, yeah, I've been bringing on some of the same guests, some of my my friends in the Pokemon card
Oh,
community recently, which I know people here do enjoy, but I think they'll really appreciate hearing from someone who's I think very similarly passionate about cards and pop culture IP type cards, but
mhm.
comes maybe from a little bit of a different background or different experiences. So if you could just introduce yourself a little bit to my audience. First of all, the link is in the description for the
Uh-huh.
Great Curators channel. You can definitely go check them out there. But just for the people watching, just giving them a sense of kind of who you are, yeah, what your background in the hobby is.
Sure. I'm pretty sure like most of your viewers probably don't know me because I don't play in the Pokemon space that much. But my name's Daniel. I go by the Great Curator on Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, and mainly I'm a big collector and a dealer at the hobby. In the hobby, I go to all the big shows across the country. I mainly focus right now on pop culture cards, which is kind of like where I found my niche, that being like Star Wars, Marvel, wrestling, and other like popular culture stuff like TV shows, movies, things like that. But I also do a little bit of sports here and there. And that's basically it. And my content is kind of focused on, enjoying the hobby for what it is, buying, selling, trading. We talk about like investing a little bit, but it's not the main focus of the channel. And then I also make like silly, fun content on Instagram, reels, and things like that. So that's why people know me.
Cool. So do you so when did you how long ago did you start? And you started with sports initially?
Yeah, so my story is very similar to
Yeah.
like like 90% of people out there right now. Is I got back into it during the pandemic time. I've been a collector my whole life. Ever since I was a little kid, I was a collector of all sorts of things, but mainly like toys, comics, and cards. Early 90s, and then just like many people, I came in and out of the hobby as I got older. I went to school, work and family and all that stuff. But I got back into it in late 2020 during COVID time, where basically the hobby had a resurgence,
Mhm.
and suddenly all these things that we've hoarded for years became valuable. And I got back into it mainly sports first. But over the last year and a half or so, I've really kind of like leaned into pop culture a lot more, because it's just that's where most of my interest lies. But yeah, that's kind of like how I got my start.
What are your favorite cards these days? Like what are the things that or the IPs that you're sort of chasing or into these days?
Right now, I'm very, very focused on Star Wars. That market has been red hot, and there's been a lot of fun opportunities to play in that space. Marvel and wrestling are probably secondary. So those are like my top three things. Just because, I mean, there's a lot of fun things you can collect and make money on in the hobby right now, but those are like the three things that I just love the most. Marvel IP, Star Wars, and wrestling.
Do you find that you're drawn to them for the financial opportunity or drawn to them for your own interest in the IPs or some sort of combination? Where are you at with that?
Like it's interesting you asked that, because like I feel like when I first got into back into the hobby in terms of just trying to buy, sell. Well, first of all, I got back into the hobby for investing purposes, right? Just like everybody. But investing kind of really quickly shifted to like trying to flip cards and make a profit. So
Mhm.
profit was always like first mindset. That's why I was in the sports. But as I got deeper into the hobby and turned it into like almost like a full-time side hustle, I kind of I kind of found myself, well, I found a lot more success when I was buying, selling, trading things that I had a deep interest in, which is pop culture.
Mhm.
So I would say like 90% of what I do now in the hobby is because I have a genuine interest in it. Like I love Star Wars, Marvel, wrestling, pop culture, TV shows, all that stuff. Like I'm a trivia nerd when it comes to that stuff, so I understand it very well. So that's kind of like my main focus now. And secondary priority is making money off of that stuff, making profit off of it. I find that when you're very passionate about what you collect, and if you have that mindset first, you'll make smarter decisions, and it's easier to like resell cards, when you have a passion behind it, versus if you're just chasing a card purely for profit, you might be speculating a little bit too much and you get burned.
Yeah, I think for me, so I collected both Pokemon cards and sports cards a lot when I was a kid. And so when I got back into it, I like took a look at these markets, and the Pokemon market for me was a market that, first of all, I could afford way, way more than sports cards.
Yeah.
And I felt like I had a much more of a competitive advantage because I was actually competing with people more of my financial means, in their 30s, in their early 30s, because most of the guys who've been doing this for, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years, these guys with these unbelievably valuable, sports card collections, first of all, had, 30 years of experience sort of leading up to that, of making money in their careers. And so although I liked sports, I probably like Pokemon the best anyway, and frankly, always did. Even as a kid, it's what engaged me the most. And I've definitely, as an adult, the pop culture stuff, the Star Wars, the Marvel, the DC stuff, the Lord of the Rings, like it's connected with me the most, and a lot of like anime stuff that I like to watch. But I think that was a part of it initially, was that I saw a great like market opportunity because I felt that the cards I got in about 6 years ago. I felt like the cards were just really undervalued versus what I thought demand would be for my age group, basically. And at that time, you could buy a lot of these cards for, I don't know how well you know the Pokemon market or how well you sort of followed the percentages, but believe it or not, most things have blown up even more than sports, which I know.
I'm not surprised at all.
Yeah. We're talking 50 times, 30 times, 20 times, crazy multiples, and we've seen that in Marvel, right?
Yeah.
Particularly before it, there's been a correction on Marvel, but certainly at the height, there were PMGs that were going, $200 1 month, and then 4 months later were $5,000, So, crazy times in these pop culture markets. But so for me, it's always been a mixture of interests. But my main goal and my main joy is the collecting aspect. But part of the collecting aspect is actually financial for me, and the joy of kind of finding the good deal, of analyzing the markets and understanding the markets. It's not to like sell these for profit to fund my life, ideally. And I think part of why investing gets a bad rap is because, first of all, there's like a lot of bad investing advice and a lot of just like, not, in my opinion, like not understanding like the risk of investing into pieces of cardboard and pieces of like pop culture collectible memorabilia. And a lot of people who I think had a lot of success during a huge boom mania period and maybe didn't realize like the dangers associated. And so they weren't necessarily like I think some of these people unfairly got a bad rap of being like pump and dumpers, when in reality they just maybe didn't know better in some instances, in my personal opinion. So there's this middle ground of like, how do you give and how do you have good financial conversations without like being irresponsible, which is something that we talk a lot about on this channel. It's like talking about the market, but in a way that teaches, educates, helps share information, but doesn't feel like it's shilling things up, and trying to strike that balance, which of course is a difficult balance to strike when you're talking about this stuff. How do you find, I know you said that you feel like your channel isn't, definitely not only finance, and I think you said not even, mainly finance, but how do you feel like you've kind of, with Star Wars, let's use Star Wars, because I think it's a good one to talk about. How do you build that market? How do you showcase that market in a way that is healthy and in a way that encourages people to engage in it, but not spend irresponsibly? Like, what are your thoughts about that?
Well, so man, there's so many great topics just in that 2 minute 2 minute conversation that you just had right there, that we could talk about this for like 5 hours, to be honest. Like one thing I'll say this, I'm going to answer your question, but one thing I'll say this is like, I grew up with Pokemon also. I was never really into it as a kid outside of watching the TV show, the cartoon, because I wasn't like sophisticated enough to understand how to play the game back in the day, so I didn't really like get too much into collecting that. But I tried to get into Pokemon also last year, but it was just way over my head in terms of trying to understand everything about it, that I couldn't hang. I have a small collection, like 5 cards here, like this is my favorite one right here, just because I think it's really unique, the Ancient Mew card. But yeah, I tried to get into it, but it was just the learning curve was just too much for me at that time. So that's when I realized that the learning curve was too high for me, because I wasn't like fully invested in Pokemon in terms of my love for it, and that was one of the turning points for me, where I realized, look, I need to lean into things that I'm super passionate about. And my passion comes from nostalgia, being a kid, just collecting these different IPs. But I'm not surprised about how the Pokemon market is at all, because I think it's one of the greatest IPs out there right now. One of probably the biggest. I think it is the most profitable IP out of all the ones.
It's 5 times bigger than things like Marvel in terms of the total amount. Now, the card part is only a small part of the overall Pokemon brand and IP, but
yeah. So that's another thing too. Like when I look at these different, what we call them IPs, intellectual property, right? I look at them as what they are, IPs. A lot of people will just look at it as regular cards, right? But cards are just like a small collectible niche within the IP brand, and that's where I've kind of leaned into in the last, like, I'd say like 8 to 10 months or so, where I've been looking at strong IPs. But I learned that lesson from being in the Pokemon market, because um, when I look at Pokemon cards, I think that they're fun, they're whimsical. I love the artwork and everything about them. I want to collect them. I just don't know how to be in that space, because I don't have enough experience to understand the subtleties behind all the different cards and things like that. But trying to get into that space, I bought a bunch of wax. I was ripping things. I had fun for about like 2 months being in the Pokemon space, but I realized like I couldn't hang with all the other people. So then that's why I kind of leaned back into sports. And when I went back into sports, that's when I kind of started looking at like the whole IP brand. So to answer your question about like Star Wars, for example, right? What I try to do with Star Wars in terms of, let me go back here. Sorry, I tend to go on rants.
As you can tell, I say like 13 different topics.
Know, right? I have all these points in my head, and I'm trying to like go through it, but I forget. So I'm going to jump around a lot. So apologies to your viewers.
That's what we want here.
I promise I will give good little tidbits of knowledge if you just stick with me here for a little bit. So I just totally lost my train of thought going through that. But what was give me your question again? It'll come back to me.
So you were just talking about sort of your journey, realizing that IPs maybe had potential, saying that Pokemon, you liked it, but you didn't feel like you really knew it that well. So you leaned into things that you really knew well. Okay, and then you started thinking about sports. That's where you left it.
So when I started making my content, which is just over a year ago, I tried to be like, just like everybody else, I try to be like Sports Card Investor, where I try to give sound financial advice to people about how to make money in the card market. And the reason I was doing that is because before I got really into cards, I've studied investment strategies. I'm in other different type of markets, stocks, real estate, things like that. So I kind of understand, how markets work and things like that. And I apply a lot of that stuff to the card market. And about like a year ago, like after May of last year or something, that's when the sports card market started to like have a downturn, a steep downturn. Yeah. And a lot of the people that I hung around with were like panicking. They're like, it was very pessimistic at that time, very pessimistic. Yeah. People were very down on the market. People were panic selling and things like that. So I started to make content to explain to people how markets work, to try to give them advice on how to sell their cards, how to get out of cards if they're underwater, things like that. And a lot of my early videos, if you watch them, they're very stiff. They're like me sitting at my desk trying to tell people what to do. And it was really cool. And a lot of people really loved that type of content, but it just wasn't, it wasn't very fun for me to make that type of content, but it was very useful. So I put out a series of videos early on where I was doing that kind of thing. And as I was doing that, where I was trying to tell people to calm down, basically how to navigate this market, that's when I kind of started to lean into pop culture a little bit more, because when I was trying to do this with sports or Pokemon and things like that, it wasn't it was like it was stress, right? Like if you try to buy, sell, trade cards for things that you don't really love and you're just chasing profit, it gets very stressful. And I think that's where a lot of people found themselves last year. Maybe even they find themselves there this, like right now, like today, right? If like you see all these young people get into the hobby, they think it's fun. They think it's, I'm going to buy, sell, trade cards and this is going to be great. And then they realize how difficult it is. They realize how volatile the market can be. If you're buying cards at like 90% comps and then the comp drops 10, 15% a week later, and then you're screwed and you can't do anything about it, So I found out when I was trying to do that, when I was trying to play that hustle game, is very stressful for me. I didn't enjoy it at all. And then when I leaned into more collector focused, that's when I started to find that it was a lot easier to buy, sell, trade cards, because I was buying things that I really liked, that I really was really knowledgeable on. And I didn't mind if the market changed and I had to hold it. I had more patience. It was easier to be more patient when you're holding things that you really enjoy. And I found way better success playing in the pop culture market than I did in the sports market. And I just kind of been leaning towards that way ever since. And when I was making my content, I didn't want to make content saying that, you need to buy these top 10 cards because they're going up. I think there's a place for that. For a lot of content creators out there, there's definitely a place for that type of analytical data, things like that. But for me, I didn't want to be in that category. So I wanted to kind of like make content where it was like collector focus and saying that this stuff is really cool, guys, and this is great, and this is why we should buy it. Because the way that I look at the market is a little bit different than other people. People may look at the market, they'll look at like the analytics, right, and how many transactions go on, and they'll measure it by graphs and all that stuff, right? All stuff that's way over my head, right? I look at it in a very simplistic way in terms of supply and demand dynamics, right? The more demand that you have for a certain card, a certain player or character or whatever, right? And you weigh that out against the supply that's available, that's going to determine the price. To me, that's how I look at it. So when I was leaning into like these different IPs like Marvel, Star Wars, wrestling, you could even put Pokemon in there. I look for like really, really strong IPs that have a big community of collectors. And if there's a big community of collectors, then that's going to be the foundation of the people that are going to have demand for the cards that you get, right? And all that it takes is giving that card particular exposure, whether it's on Instagram, a vlog on YouTube or whatever, to create the demand. So that's kind of like where I was starting to steer my content, where is I wanted to put proper exposure on the cards that I really love, the cards that I collect and things like that. And then if that would organically drive the demand, then the price would go up. And I was starting to make content focused like that. And I was telling people, get into these cards, if you love it. Okay. Don't try to flip these cards, just try to do it if you love it. And then, the value will come from that. But then I got accused by just a few people, a handful of very loud people in the hobby, of like pumping and dumping. Yeah. And I had a whole like 2 or 3 months where I had to like defend myself against all these idiots out there who just didn't understand where I was coming from. And I realized I stopped engaging with them after I realized that we were having two different conversations. If you're coming from the mindset of profit first, buy, sell, flip, things like that, then you won't understand the collector mindset. You won't understand why somebody's buying a card that one day is worthless and the next day it's worth a lot of money. You just won't understand that, right? Because you're just thinking that me as a content creator, I'm trying to promote a card to get people to buy it, promising that there's value there, right? But that's not what I'm doing. What I'm doing is I'm trying to build a community of collectors that will create a level of demand that will sustain the values on all these cards. And all those people that complain about the market and complain about pumping and dumping, all this stuff, they just don't understand that type of dynamic. So with Star Wars in particular, like what I'm trying to do right now is a lot of my content is focused around building a community of collectors around this set of Star Wars cards, Topps Chrome Galaxy, where, in my opinion, they're just beautiful cards, and everybody that I expose to that set loves it for what it is, of the artwork and the cards itself, and they're less concerned about the value and the resale and all that stuff, and that has worked out pretty well so far. But we'll see. We'll see. I think if there's any like crazy record sales on Golden or something like that, we might have another Marvel PMG fiasco on our hands. So we'll kind of see. I don't know. That was a long rant. Did you get anything from that?
No, a lot of great stuff.
Yeah.
So, I mean, my mind goes to that. I think it's complicated. I think a lot of people, including myself, sometimes we try to oversimplify complicated things. And the reality is, like, we all as people have a lot of motives going on. And so you as a business owner, you have motives to collect, you have motives to make profit, you have motives to teach and educate, and you have motives to like have fun and to be passionate about things you like. And I think often people try to reduce us to, you're just in it for money. You're not a human being who also really loves this stuff and has friendships and cares about people and wants to grow it also because it's fun to educate and grow something. But there's also, if you have a business, or in my case, if I need to continue to sell or flip in order to keep building my collection and reaching my collection goals, there is a financial incentive to things. And I think it's like, how are you aware of that financial incentive? How do you communicate that financial incentive? And I think some of the negative things I've heard, and I don't know the discussion around you specifically, but we've had plenty of negative discussions in our neck of the woods in Pokemon, as does every single market that exists in the world outside of cards. You see these types of conversations happening everywhere. It's like, the true collector versus the person who's just here to make money off of us versus, these hybrids. It's I tend to come from the perspective of, it's going to be, you really have to look at people's actions, and you really have to look at them over a long period of time to get a sense of like their character and what they're willing to do and not willing to do. And it isn't very black and white, right? So, and we've talked, I mean, I've had many conversations on this channel too about selling practices, about how do you advertise, how do you market yourself, what is sort of an ethical way to do that. And it always, comes down to like you talk to two different people in chat, and you'll get three opinions, so there's just going to be lots of opinions. And I think a number of the opinions some of the opinions are very valid and interesting to listen to. And then it sounds like maybe you ran into this. Some of the opinions are sort of like, they're not interested in listening to you. They're not interested in getting to know you as a human being. And they're also not interested in like giving you a break and maybe being generous. And I'm sure you've done things in this hobby that maybe skirted the line, at times. I mean, we all make mistakes. We all do things. I mean, Rusty, who's like, the god of Poke, is like one of the most moral guys ever, like, did like raffles and grab bags and stuff early on. And then he like evolved because he felt like that wasn't the best way to do it. And it felt a little bit not great. You know what I mean? So we also sort of evolve as a community. And a lot of people have only been here like a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. That's not a lot of time. So there's this weird sort of, and then there's the whole clickbait thing, right? People attack people because they know that those videos get the most views, which provides incentive for them to continue to go after you or someone else. There's all of that stuff too, so.
Let me just comment on that real quick here. I think that's funny because there was a time where people were making videos of me, and I was very like hurt by it, very offended. But then I realized that my subscriber base and my followers drastically improved when they were giving me that exposure. So now I don't mind it. If people want to talk bad about me, that's fine. That just helps me get more exposure. But I think it's funny when people try to do that, because you're absolutely right. Like, people who are trying to get attention for themselves will use other people's names and attack them for no good reason, just because they want that type of exposure for themselves. It's unfortunate, but it happens. But I don't mind it anymore because I feel like I'm true to the content that I put out there. It's genuine, and I feel like when when people bring attention and attack me for whatever reason, and other people come to my page and see this kind of stuff because they want to comment and they're really angry about it.
Mhm.
Once they see the type of content I put out there, they know that, they can probably make a decision that it's probably like not true what the other person's trying to say, right? So I don't
Sure.
mind that type of attention or attention anymore either.
And
Well,
in my experience, some people give constructive criticism and things from a different perspective that I reflect on. And then some people, they're just attacking me because they don't have any real value. Like, they're not actually bringing passion about the actual
mhm,
hobby. They don't actually care. They don't know the statistics. They don't know the information about the card, and they want their channel to succeed. And so their channel is built on putting down other people. And there's a difference.
right.
And one is actually important because we can't just all, you know, we can learn things from each other. And sometimes, like, I can be very sure that I'm ethically right about something and not be, right?
Mhm,
Like, because someone teaches me something. Like, I just had a video where I brought, a good friend of mine in the channel, Mason Cardinal Gaming, who's like a LGS owner. And we talked about this situation that happened with me in an LGS for me to get a better sense of, like, was I mistreated by them? Is there just something that I didn't understand? A lot of times, rather than attacking, it'd be good to reach out to the content creator, try to have a civil discussion, try to figure it out. The people who don't try to do that, or they go into conversations with that feeling of, like, I have an axe to grind rather than I'm actually trying to, like, build a bridge and improve something.
mhm.
Um, those are the people that, unfortunately, um, yeah, and some of them, I probably really feel that they're doing real good work and rationalize it in sort of whatever way they might, but it's an unfortunate thing. Anything else you want to add on this topic, and then we can get back to talking about cards. But
Yeah, I will say this. This is one of my overarching, messages in my
yeah,
mission statement here is building a strong community, because the way that I kind of see the card values here, and this is a separate discussion in itself, but let me just pull an example right here. For example, right? Like this card right here. Like, some people will be able to look up this card and they'll say, okay, this card is worth X amount of dollars today, right? That's the value, and you should get that value for it. But the way that I kind of look at all cards is that the value is based on the collectability of it, the demand, right? Supply and demand dynamics again here, the
mhm,
demand for it. And the only way that I can get this card to go up in value is not hoping that the market for this will go up, but the demand for it will go up. And the only way that we can get the demand up for this card or any type of card out there is by building a strong community of collectors and investors, or flippers, whatever you want to call yourself. There's
mhm.
lots of ways that you can participate in the hobby. There's lots of ways you can make money in the hobby, but we have to build up that community base, right, to drive that demand. Because if we just kind of stay stagnant the way we are, the demand is not going to be able to keep up with the amount of massive supply that continues to grow in the hobby for all types of cards, right? Slabs, printed
Mhm.
cards, all, anything that's out there. And what I try to promote on my channel and my content is for, positivity, basically, within the hobby, where we instead of attacking each other, or instead of putting each other down or things like that, we basically try to educate, build up the community and things like that. So I try not to really engage with, like, negativity or people out there who are just trying to bring down the hobby, because I just don't see any real value in it. I mean, a lot of these guys, they probably do have great points here and there, and you can learn from some of their stuff, but I just don't see how that grows the community. So
So
that's why with my content, I try to just kind of stay on that positive line, educate, and then grow the community, help as many people out as we can. That's what I like to promote, because I think that helps out everybody in the hobby.
I agree, but I really think that there are people who actually are scamming for sure, and market manipulating and shill bidding and doing all these activities. And I think it's important for people to be aware of that, but also for it not to be overblown. So there's a way to talk about it. There's a way to kind of, all my content is just about that, and I'm constantly inciting anger and frustration and fear, versus 5% of my content is like that, because that's probably about reflects probably about how important it is to talk about and how big of a deal it is to talk about, in my mind. And again, if you are going to talk about something like that, you really need very concrete evidence, particularly if you're going to go after a specific person or a specific business. Because it's one thing to put out a video, not naming anyone's name or attacking anyone specifically, and talking about the dangers of pre-ordering or the dangers of addiction in breaks and the dangers of, and then it's a different thing to like say this breaker particularly is inciting addiction, this, this whatever, and that's the type of content I see where people are directly sort of attacking. And so for me, and again, you and I can also have slightly different opinions on it, right? It's fine. But, for me, like the overly positive or pretending that nothing happens also creates the echo chambers of like, if we talk about negativity, that's bad. And so I can't be around that. I try to exist in sort of that middle ground as much as possible. But of course in my mind at least, but of course it's impossible to stay there. And at times I get overinflated by things. And then at times I'm probably too, I close my eyes too much probably at times too, to certain bad acting. But as far as your demand point about like, how do we build demand in the long run? I think it all builds demand. I mean, I think that, believe it. I mean, honestly, the negative that stuff really builds a lot of demand. Like when you have like Logan Paul doing a fake, having a fake case, right? Opening this G.I. Joe case, and you have 1 million people who watch that video or maybe tune back in with Pokemon, like that puts attention back on Pokemon when we just think about it that way. Like, it's now, does it also cause people to be wary, maybe overly wary of buying vintage boxes? Does it hurt the prices on vintage boxes? This is a whole discussion we're having in the Pokemon community right now. Now, there are a decent amount of faked resealed boxes out there. And there are people, maybe it's only a few people, someone like Rattle Pokemon in the Pokemon community has made some videos on some of the people he's found doing these scams, like resealing these boxes. To me, if you're resealing boxes and there's proof, like you should be called out, like you're doing something like illegal. Mm-hmm. That is very different though than sort of making these kind of like, you're a pumper, you're a shiller, kind of nebulous-y, difficult to yeah. So what do you think about that?
That's a very interesting topic. I think that there's two categories here. And I kind of fall into more one of the categories, which is what I was kind of speaking about earlier. But I mean, obviously, another thing I talk about is bad actors and having very high level of conduct that kind of weeds out the bad actors, right? So I kind of talk about that in all the intros of my videos. I think obviously if there's any type of fraudulent activity like resealing boxes and things like that, yes, that stuff has to be called out. Obviously, and a lot of that comes from a lot of that can be handled through educating people on things to look for so that they don't get scammed. You mentioned like breaks, being addicted to breaking and things like that. We have to teach people to look out for these things. I mean, maybe I'll get in trouble for saying this, but maybe like a lot of these things are, like if you have common sense, you can avoid some of these traps, right? Like if somebody's promising you, X amount of returns on this break, or this repack or whatever, just be skeptical of those type of things. So things like that, I have no problem with. I would, I actually like that type of content where people kind of educate people on the different traps that you can get into within the hobby, because I think it's very important for people to kind of like learn that as a basics. I myself fell into some of those things when I got back into the hobby. Another thing is funny that you mentioned with the Pokemon stuff. Like one of the reasons I got out of Pokemon is I was scared of all the counterfeit Pokemon cards out there, and I couldn't like tell the difference. So that's one reason I got out of it. But the problem I have with the people that make the overly negative comments towards other people in terms of like maybe pumping and dumping or saying something doesn't have value or this or that is I think that they're trying to create false sense of grievance in a lot of people. And just to rile people up for the sake of it. They're not really trying to educate people. They're not really trying to steer people away from doing a certain type of activity, but they're just trying to upset people because that's how they thrive on their content. And those kind of type of people I don't like to engage with, just because I don't see any real value or real return on investment of my time to engage with them. So that's the kind of stuff that I'm talking about. Obviously, anything that's fraudulent, all that stuff is terrible, and we definitely need watchdogs. Like that guy who did the video on Logan Paul, that was very impressive. Pokemon
That was
Rattle,
talking about Rattle,
yeah, Rattle, that was very impressive. Stuff like that. I really enjoy that type of content, but the guys that just kind of like rant about like why this card is not worth anything or why this person's bad for the hobby because they're making content about certain things. It's just like, I feel like that kind of stifles the growth of the hobby, because people who get into cards, we get into it because it's fun. It's not just money. Okay. It's not just money. I tell people all the time, if you want to make money, there's easier ways to make money than trying to like flip or invest in cards. You can do 100 different things. Don't get into the card game. Okay. Right. But we get into cards because it's like an escape from the real world. The real world is really messed up. There's like bad things that happen every day that you see on the news. One of the reasons that I got back into cards and that I've kind of like dedicated a lot of my time to being in the hobby last year is because, back when I got into cards, like in 2020, that was like the election year. And there was just like so much negativity in the news every day. It was just very stressful. So I was looking for an outlet where I could just relax and get away from all the messed up things in the world. And that's why I really enjoy being in cards and being in the hobby. And I think that what's the word I want to look for? That reason for me being in the hobby is shared by a lot of people. And that's kind of like that's very sacred. You know what I mean? It's very sacred for this to be a safe space where we can enjoy ourselves and get away from the stresses of the world. And I don't like it when I see other people trying to bring the stresses of the world into the hobby, and trying to poison it by creating what I call the false sense of grievance. So that kind of content, I try to overpower it with my own positivity stuff. And it annoys me when people say that I'm like tuning out all the negativity in the world, which I'm not, right? Within the hobby, which I'm not. It's just that I don't want to talk about that stuff. It's very easy for me to like, if I don't want to engage in something because there's no value in it to me, I don't have to like engage it. I don't have to watch that content. I can shut it off. I don't have to collect these cards if I think they're bad for me or anything like that. It's very easy for me to shut it off. But when there's people out there that kind of overly promote that and say that you have to kind of deal with that, it just kind of ruins the whole essence of the hobby for me.
I think what's hard is that there's money and business in all of this. And often when there's money in business, you're going to see like, it's hard to just exist in the lovely story of Star Wars. Do you know what I mean? Like, cause first of all, I love your perspective. And there was something you said, I forget exactly how you phrased it, that definitely made me think like, it's like, I think you said something like, I don't want to bring in, it's like, I have a bunch of Star Wars cards here, right? Like these cards, they just make me happy. Like, all these characters, like, I love Star Wars. Like I love the world. I love the lore. I love the characters. And I don't care what any other human being thinks about that. It's a personal sort of thing for me, just like Pokemon and just like the animes and different things that I like. And it's really nice to exist in that and to share that excitement and feelings. It's like we can both look at like Chewbacca and have like, I love Chewie, like, and just this positive, wonderful, childlike sort of wonder and feeling, right? And then there's like, how much money will this make me? What price should I buy it at? When should I sell it? There's all of this sort of market stuff, which I think definitely can take you out of that. And I do think requires more of like it's business, and in business there's going to be more of that sort of uncomfortable sort of where are my ethics, what is shilling, what isn't, and there's going to be these types of discussions. But I think on a personal level, you deciding when you want to have that discussion and which person you want to have that with, and be like, this person's just super negative. Like, I don't feel like they're interested in having that discussion in a way. I don't feel like they're really listening to me, and they're really poisoning this experience for me on a personal level. It's like, yeah, I mean, like, absolutely. respect yourself enough. I'm in agreement. It's like respect yourself enough to talk to people who you find are good faith actors, right? To, you know, or like who build you up and who want you to succeed and care about you and also really care about these things. And I do think that the love for the characters and the stories, the IPs, the collecting of the cards can be lost in the scamming, in the worrying about the fraud and the money, and in the criticisms of other content creators. Absolutely, you know, I completely agree with that, and I think that's a really really, I think you put that really well, and yeah.
You know, and to add to that, I think that, you know, in the last 2 years or so, success in the hobby has been defined by how much money you could make, right? From flipping or buying the right card at the right time and cashing out on it, right? That
Yeah,
so there's always that going to be that like that mindset where profit is always first. And that's easy to do when the market is just keeps going up and up and up, right? And you never have any bad times. But I would say the last year or so, you know, it has not been very easy to turn a profit in the hobby. Right? A lot of people have lost money by
sure.
speculating on whatever cards they're buying and things like that. So one of the things that I've been really focusing on is trying to change the narrative of what
Mm,
is successful in the hobby. You
mm,
know, it's not about how much money you make; it's about how much you can enjoy this what it is. It's collecting, right? Hobby, being in the hobby and collecting and enjoying the experience, and that's where the success comes. And as a bonus, almost like now the stuff that we love to collect, now that's actually worth money. You know, and let's not be naive about it. One of the reasons we're interested in all these cards and things like that is because it's worth money, right? If these things were not worth anything, then we wouldn't be spending so much money on them. But I try to make that like a secondary point for people, where if you can enjoy collecting, right? You buy the things that you love, you can enjoy it for as long as you want, and then when the time is right, you can easily move out of that and maybe make a profit or break even or whatever it is. Then you'll be in a lot better position than if you're trying to just solely focus on the profit of the hobby, right? And that strategy has worked out very well for me the last 8 to 10 months or so, when I've kind of shifted from trying to be a full-time flipper to being more of a collector that occasionally flips or gets in and out of cards or things like that.
so yeah, so I guess so the question is like how, and feel free to answer this, or you know, in any way you want, or if you don't want to answer it, but like in terms of supporting yourself, like do you depend on, are you full time or half time in this, or like, you know, because it gets into that sort of situation too. It's like the more I do this as a job, the harder it is, I think, to remain in sort of just that more pure collector mindset, even if you prefer to be there, that type of thing. So, is this a full time job for you? Is this a part time job, side hobby?
I call it a full-time side hustle, but not full-time income. You know what I mean? I dedicate all my free time. I mean, I have a day job. I have other investments and things like that. I'm not supported by the money I make selling cards, but I do it almost as a full-time side hustle, really.
Yeah.
But I do it because I love it. I really enjoy it, so I don't mind spending the time. For me, it's an escape from the outside world, and at the same time, I can kind of supplement all the cost involved by buying, selling, trading cards and things like that. So that's kind of how I treat it. But I feel like you know it just, if you can change your mindset in terms of what it is to be successful in the hobby, it'll be a lot easier for a lot of people to be able to supplement the cost of buying cards or going to card shows and things like that. They can even fuel the hobby with the money that they can make doing it, but they just got to do it in the right way and have the right mindset. Otherwise, it's going to be stressful and it's going to be a struggle. I have friends that do this full time, and they're always stressed. They're always stressed because they're buying cards that they know they can make money on, that they're flipping, but it's very volatile, versus people who are buying cards that they want, and those cards appreciating over time.
Yeah, and I think for me, I mean, why I didn't want to do this full time or never wanted to do it for that income is because I actually don't enjoy flipping particularly. I enjoy collecting, and
Mhm.
then sort of a longer term investing, speculating, whatever word you want to use, or hoping that it will retain value or go up in value. But at the end of the day, like building a collection of cards of different CCGs that I really enjoy. Like my long-term goal is like building a card museum with other people.
That
And
sounds awesome. That
yeah,
sounds awesome. I would love to do something like that.
yeah, and there's a ton of people, like the biggest collectors in Pokemon. I've talked to a lot, like there's a ton of people super interested in that. It will definitely happen someday, as long as we're, a number of us are still, here in this space. And that being my long-term goal is why I like never burn out from this, and why it's like always really fun. Because it's not, at the end of the day, it's not a job that I'm making, I'm having to buy and flip things that I don't even like, that I don't understand, that I don't enjoy,
Mhm.
and so much of the mania this year, the bubble, came from that sort of thing. There was a lot of people, for example, even in sports, right? A lot of people jumped into Pokemon who knew nothing about Pokemon, who had no particular interest in Pokemon, because they saw the prices and they knew they could make a lot of
Yeah.
money. And
Yeah.
that isn't inherently bad, but it's just a dangerous sort of scenario for sort of everyone involved.
Right.
It's not a particularly sustainable thing. So the market side of what you're talking about, the way I would think about it would be that the demand, the stickier the demand, the more people who like me, who look at this card and light up because they love Chewy, like that's real demand. That's someone who's going to hold this card, who I enjoy having this card, who I have no intention to ever sell this card, and everything that hits my personal collection will hopefully never ever be sold. From a market perspective, that's actually what actually sustains these types of hobbies and build it up. And then so it's just a question of like, how many people are like me? How many people who have the funds to actually do that? And those are the things that get sussed out over time. But when things kind of blow up, like PMGs and Marvel, like Star Wars to a certain extent, obviously, like the Galaxy set, got really hot. You have Sapphire, which is, a huge hit with a lot of people, and Masterwork is done well. And there's been a lot of things that have moved up quite a bit, although not in the percentage that Marvel or PMGs did. When the Marvel PMG stuff was blowing up, I was like, this is terrifying. Like, and the conversation shift from like, I'm so excited to get this item and I really enjoy this item, to like, when should I sell this? When should I flip it? How much money am I going to make? And the more the conversation shifts to that, I actually don't think that's like a bad thing morally, as much as it is a dangerous sign of a bubble for people to think in terms of psychology. The more people are talking about like how much they enjoy it, the better the sign that like that demand is sticky at the current prices. If everyone here is just looking to flip, it is it's a greater fool situation.
Mhm.
And whoever the last person is who gets stuck with them, if we're all trying to flip our cards and no one actually wants it, it's just a house of cards that's waiting to fall down. And do I think there are areas of probably all card markets right now that are mostly built up of that? Probably. But do I also think that there are fairly rare, scarce items, and that there's huge demand, and for stuff in Star Wars, for stuff in Marvel, for all these, for Pokemon, for there's huge growth potential in terms of these IPs, in terms of multiple generations coming in terms of people my age just having more income to spend, right? These types of market and out, trying to analyze that demand or predict that demand. But there's also, we're coming off of a weird period where people were at home a lot, where people needed the comfort of these things. And so the question is like, how sticky is all that demand? And to me, we're in that period now of, we're sort of seeing, and all these markets are trying to kind of figure out where they're at. I don't think there's any risk of like them being dead, or people being like, I'm suddenly completely uninterested in this. But I do think they're all trying to find their footing. And so for people who are trying to start a business in this type of environment, that's just a lot of risk. That's a lot of risk. And people who, it's in your situation, it's no risk, because you have a full-time job and it's all passion and it's all gravy and it's all on top. It's all about how much you want to work, right? And so for a lot of people out there doing it, it isn't that much risk. But for others, it's a lot of risk, because a lot of these markets are still trying to find their footing. And so it's just people need to take sort of that personal responsibility, in my opinion, of deciding if they want to do that. That's the way that I talk to people about it when they ask me for sort of my advice, and just, understand that we don't really know quite where this stuff is going to rest, I think, yet. Find a new equilibrium.
Yeah, I think you made really two interesting points there that I'll kind of piggyback on here. Is like the first part where you're saying that, kind of like the demand for this. If too many people are trying to flip in the market, that's when it creates a bubble. So that's why, like, I've really tried to focus on pushing that narrative that, you need to be a collector first. Put the joy of collecting first over profit, and then you'll make smarter decisions. People have definitely got a lot smarter in terms of the cards they've been buying over the last year. The people that I've seen, anyways, like we're no longer buying, PSA 10s of base cards that were overprinted and things like that. Like, people are definitely being a lot smarter in terms of the cards that they've been buying. But we still need to keep that focus on the collector first mentality, because that will be what sustains the values of these cards, not just flipping. Because if we flip too much, like you said, somebody's going to end up holding the bag at the end of the day, and it's not going to be good. And I think that's what happened with Marvel PMGs. Unfortunately, people were just trying to flip those too much, and it was not sustainable. But the other part the point that you made here, I just lost my train of thought again. But I'll say this is like, it's good to keep people educated about these types of things, and there's room for content creators that make content, teaching people how to make money in the hobby and things like that. But we still need to keep the focus on, or we still need to change the focus from being successful in the hobby by how much money you can make, to being successful based on how much you enjoy the hobby and what kind of crazy, awesome, beautiful collections that you can build that also hold value to that. And I think that once that mindset shifts to that, then the hobby will get to that next stage of evolution where there's a strong influx of collectors that are supporting the value of all these cards.
Yeah. I mean, I think that that is how markets are built, and there's some combination of there's a little. So, for example, I made a video a few weeks ago where I just showed a couple of Star Wars cards, and I had one person who commented that by just showing them, I'm shilling the market up, right? And I basically said back to them, like, I've shown thousands of Pokemon cards in the channel, and you've never said that. Why are you not, and the meaning being, like, people are cool often when you shill or show the stuff that they have in their collection. People are worried I'm going to like move people away from Pokemon, lower the value of their collections or something. I'm going to move them into Star Wars, these types of things. The way that I look at this stuff is that exposure is how people learn about things, and you're not going to know you want something until it exists. And you're not going to know you want something until you understand exactly what it is. Mm-hmm. And so education is never bad as long as it's accurate. And as long as it tries to take as many sides as tries to take in account as many sides and things as possible. So that's why I try to talk about so many things here, and why, rather than trying to focus mostly on, on this channel, we try to focus, rather than me showing cards or talking about specific cards, we mostly try and talk about just like supply and demand fundamentals, things that would apply to anything, so that people can kind of take those concepts and sort of apply it to whatever hobby they're in, whatever market they're in. But I also really enjoy showing cards occasionally and showing specific things that I think are cool and describing that. And so it's a tough balance. I get why people are on edge about that stuff. And it does have a huge impact. I mean, when Leonhardt, like when big channels show specific things or focus on specific things, like, you can see ripple effects in the market. If I talk about a card being undervalued or this type of thing, like I did an experiment a year ago where I did, and every one of them was bought off of eBay within, 10 to 15 minutes, just in the, 10,000 people that watch this channel, or something like that, like, because they're niche markets. When we talk about a card that has 10 in the world, 10 copies in the world, you only need like one or two people can dramatically 10x that market in a short amount of time, So I get the difficulty of this sort of thing, but I think it's there. It's also like, um, there's got to be that middle ground of like it's okay to show cool things and
Okay.
educate about cool things. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
I have strong feelings about this.
It's still
Okay.
something I struggle with for sure, and
Well,
so I'd love to hear your thoughts.
yeah. So, I mean, it drives me nuts when people get upset when you show off your cards, right? Like, I'll show off. Let me just show off something ridiculous here, just to piss somebody off. You know, I'll show. Let me. Okay, look at this. I'm going to cover the price tag. Look at this. This is a 1930. What is this? 1931 Walt Disney Mickey Mouse card. Not a lot of people know about this, but this is his first card. Classic card, right? And if you show something like this, people will say, "Oh, they just automatically say you're shilling it and whatever." But dude, this is what people don't understand, and this is what drives me nuts. Like, we are collectors.
Yeah.
Okay, we want to show off our collections. Before social media came and changed the game, one of the joys that every collector had, I guarantee you, is when somebody. Oh, see, you got a 19. What is 1935? Mickey Mouse.
The number one,
Yeah,
and then the
yeah.
Walt Disney one.
One of the joys that we all had back in the day was when somebody came to your house and you're able to show off your collection, because there's like a pride of ownership there, right? You want to tell people all about whatever it is that you're showing off. You want to tell them how rare it is, why it's special, the story behind it, all that stuff. And now it's so easy for us to do it because we have social media. We can do it every day. But these people out there, they just have like just these negative mindset, which is what I was talking about earlier, where they just want to create some type of false sense of grievance for people out there, saying that this person has an ulterior motive for showing off something that they've collected that they're proud of, right? And they don't understand that there are so many cards out there in the world that people don't even know about. And the only way that people will find these things out and buy those cards and create value based on demand is by giving these cards exposure. The more exposure that we can give to any niche aspect or any card in the hobby, to me, it's better, because that's how you get people to collect that type of cards, whether it's Pokemon, Star Wars, Marvel, whatever it is, right? And you want more people to collect. If we don't have more collectors going into these different markets, they're not going to grow. And the values of our cards aren't going to be there because the supply is going to overtake the demand. And a lot of people, they have this, I don't know, mindset, this closed off mindset that there's only a finite amount of collectors or people in the hobby. There's only a certain amount of money within the hobby, and that money just kind of shifts to different areas, and people get upset if it leaves their area and the values of their collectibles go down. But you can't think that way. In order for us to really be able to profit from the cards that we have to continue growing the hobby. That's why people get upset when there's like a big company like Fanatics comes in and they buy up, and they institute changes and things like that because they don't want change for whatever reason. But that stuff is good. You want companies to invest within the hobby. You want more people to come in. You want people to stop, to move on from collecting maybe one thing and then get into something else, because it builds excitement and it drives the market together as a whole, right? Like within our hobby, we all have our little niches: Pokemon, Marvel, sports, whatever, right? But the whole thing is card collecting. Right? And for us to really be able to benefit from the values of everything, we have to have constant promotion of these things. And some people do have ulterior motives. Maybe they're holding like 100 of those Disney cards, and they show it off. The price goes up and they can cash out or whatever, right? But again, it goes back to my point where we have to change the narrative from profit first. If we change the narrative to collecting first, people will be smarter about the things that they buy, and you'll get more of an organic appreciation of value in these cards versus somebody who's just trying to flip it. Like if they see it on Leonhardt's channel, for example, they buy up all the cards to try to flip it. That's not necessarily good for the hobby. But if you change the narrative about what people are looking at, so that they understand that the card has value because it's really cool, because it's historic, because there's a story behind it, versus somebody says this card's going to go up 50% in the next year or so, then you'll get away from that, right? And I got so sick of people I got so sick of having to defend me showing off all these cool things that I made up this like hashtag called pump what you like, right? And I don't see it as like a negative thing anymore. Like people used to say pump and dump as like it was like a really negative thing to say to you. But like, you know, if you have cards that you love, what do you're not going to promote it? You're not going to show it off. If you just get this crazy card at an auction and you have a great mail day for the week, you're not going to show it off and tell people how proud it is. I mean, that's ridiculous, right?
So
You want people to show off.
So interestingly,
Yeah.
I actually like being a fairly private collector, and I like I don't love showing my stuff on social media, but I think people who do really like it, it shouldn't necessarily be assumed that they're like shilling or they're being a jerk or something. So I agree with everything single
Yeah.
thing you're saying there 100%. I actually get pressure to show a lot more of my collection because there are there are people who like, you know, some of it people really want to see it. Other people like I've literally had comments like, "I don't believe you own that," or "I don't
Jake,
believe."
come on, we got to see it, Jake. You got to open up the vault. You got to open up the Pokenomics vault and show
One
us
day everyone
everything.
can come to the museum. You know?
Oh, that's what he's doing. He's building up anticipation
That's
for this museum.
yeah. So I mean, the only area where I'm not even sure I'm pushing back, but I think where someone could push back or say is, why do you want to grow the demand so much? Right? Like, why, like, if it's not about the money, and then the response to that can be like, well, I like to do things with other people. And the hobby is more fun when more people are in it. And a lot of us are doing it all together. And I like when the card values go up or because I own them or some combination of that. What do you think about that? Because that's the only place within your argument or within your framework where I could see someone saying, but like if you are a collector, wouldn't you want like less people because then prices would be cheaper and we'd be able to buy the stuff we really enjoy cheaper. So that's where that sort of counter argument comes from
Okay.
people. So
Let
how
me
would
let
you
me
respond to
let me
that?
clarify and elaborate on this,
Yeah,
okay?
yeah,
Yeah, if I was really selfish and I just wanted to collect everything at dirt cheap prices, yeah, I wouldn't want anybody to know about this stuff. But it's not that I said that it's not about the money, okay? The money is secondary, right? What makes these cards really interesting is that they have value to them. They're not just like a, you know, something that you buy at Target, like a toy or something, and you put it on your shelf and suddenly it has no value, right? They don't depreciate these things. Okay. Secondary reason that we really love cards and that we're putting a lot of money into cards right now is because they are worth money. So we do want to see our collections rise. It's almost like it's something that we can really take pride in when our collection is very valuable, right? And for a lot of people, there's, you know, if your collection is very valuable and you're able to sell it off, maybe you can trade up and buy even more valuable cards that you never had the opportunity to, or, you know, you can move that money into something else. But money is definitely part of the reason that we collect. Let's not be naive about that. Okay. The reason that we had this boom in 2020 and COVID and all that stuff is because all these people came in because suddenly these things that they collected when they were kids that weren't worth anything, suddenly they're worth a lot of money now, right? So we always have to kind of keep that in mind. But we have to do it for the right reason. We have to understand that the value from these cards comes from the demand of these cards, because they're not like, you can't take this and go to the grocery store and buy food with it, right? You can't pay for anything with cards. It comes from the collectible value, and the value is based off of that demand, which is I keep reiterating that, right? And the only way that we can sustain that value is by continuing to grow the demand, by bringing more people into the hobby and growing it and growing it. But we have to make sure that they're in the hobby long term, that they're not just here to flip, that they're here to build collections that will appreciate over time. And, you know, just like when we were kids in back in the day when we were collecting, now we have to make sure that this next generation comes in and that, you know, we can sustain the growth of the hobby. That's what
yeah.
I'm trying to say.
The Pokemon hobby. So the Pokemon hobby has done well in part. First, you know, obviously the Pokemon Company and the Pokemon Company guiding the ship, right? But you also had a number of influencers, of early content creators and early kind of collectors, people like Gary and Birdman, and I don't know if these people, but they used to have like they used to stay up, you know, late into the night talking about how do we increase demand in this hobby? How do we keep this hobby alive? How do we stop it from dying? Because Pokemon was basically dead, or, you know, near dead, you know, compared to the original boom. You know, obviously it didn't become a dead CCG, TCG like so many, but there were a few points there where it was probably fairly close, you know, in some of those low demand periods. So that can come from sort of a love, right, of wanting more people here, of wanting it to survive. And it can come also from a wanting to increase the value of my collection. I own most of the valuable pieces, and I'm in a place where I'm doing this so that I then become a celebrity within this community, and I make a lot of money and I get a lot of popularity. And the truth is nobody knows exactly what each person's motivation is or what combination of those motivations are. And I think that that's where some of the doubt, people question people's character, people question what their motives are, why they're doing what they're doing. And you know how that gets solved over time? Friendships, like actually talking to you in person, like having these long, in-depth conversations where you really get to hear a person's thought process. And I would just encourage people in general to like not overreact to anyone, give people, this is how I think of it, think that, try to give people the benefit of the doubt and try and give people, keep the long term in mind. The long term in mind is like the reason I wanted to build out a community here and do all these types of things is to make this hobby a more fun place for myself and for other people. Because now we have channels like this, we have Discords and places where people can hang out. 30 some people are going to Denver Collecticon for my Discord together. And we're all going to like have a party, trade night, collect, old school Pokemon, Nick and I, and some other people, we're working on like developing trade nights around Boston, around starting to vend at some shows here so that we can get more interest, right? Because we like love this stuff and it's really fun doing it, and we want to do it with other people. To be honest with you, the financial part for me is far back from the joy of like just nerding out about this for many, many, many hours, which I think is demonstrated by the fact that I have 5-hour conversations that make me $7, or whatever, and so many people do in this hobby. But there's always going to be some people who are just always like, they need perfection. They need you to like, if you're not a saint, if you only care about other, if you have any sort of selfishness or any sort of other motives or any sort of thing, they'll write you off. And then they'll go to someone who has a more cynical view of the world. Because a lot of what comes from these cynical channels is, I think it's actually coming from a pretty genuine place. And people have very cynical sort of perspectives about everyone is inherently selfish all the time. Everything is just sort of, driven by these, rather than people being driven by altruism and by cooperation and by, mutual success and mutual growth. People are driven by sort of selfishness and cheating. And a lot of this stuff is very deep rooted in human psychology and also in every single person out there's upbringing and their relationship with their parents. And by the way, I was a psychologist for 11 years and a therapist for 11 years, but a lot of this stuff and your perspective on these things can largely be rooted in that. But I do think it's important to try to understand people's perspectives and realize that a lot of people who are angry or upset or who are drawn to that sort of thing are actually coming from a decently reasonable place. They're just a bit sort of stuck in that negativity, in my opinion. But super interesting stuff, I think.
I got to start taking notes because there's so many things that I want to talk about. This is a really interesting conversation. I'm really enjoying myself. By the way, I know we're going a little bit over our time here, but I don't mind because this is a great conversation. But just to kind of follow up on what you're saying here, that kind of goes with what I'm saying about like there are people out there that they're just going to critique you for the sake of critiquing you, right? Because like you can't please everybody out there. And there's always going to be people that have a problem with how you conduct your business, how you present yourself with the things that you do. But that's kind of like what I mean when I say that there are people out there that just purposely try to create a false sense of grievance based on what you do. And like all these people that make content, all the biggest people out there, the people who are sponsored, the people who actually do this full time, make money. I really have no problem with any of those people because I feel like we need that. You can make money in the hobby by doing a lot of different things, and there's an abundance amount of opportunity out there for everybody. So I really have no problem with any of that stuff. And I'm just not the type of person where I fall into that rabbit hole of paying attention to negativity, paying attention to like negative comment or overly critiquing people. Because for me, if it doesn't bring me any value, I'll just ignore it, right? I have that mindset where I like to just always look for opportunity, look for the positive, and just kind of go straight forward. I try not to weigh myself down with overly negative, overly critical content or people or anything like that. That's just how I kind of conduct myself within the hobby. And I think that there's plenty of room for a lot of people to make whatever kind of content they want. And if you don't get any type of value from it, you don't have to watch it. You know, you don't have to pay attention or engage with it or anything like that. So that's why, and I get criticized sometimes for being like overly positive. Like I don't understand how people can say that I'm overly positive, right? Just because I enjoy the hobby, I enjoy what I do in the hobby, and I have fun making content where other people are kind of like polarly the opposite, right? They enjoy it in a different way. They enjoy critiquing, they enjoy having those really contrarian discussions and things like that. But for me, I don't have time for any of that stuff. You know what I mean? So I try to stay away from that myself, but I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think there's room for everybody to be in the hobby any way we can, because I look at it as a whole. Like the more content we have, the more focus we have, the more people we have coming in, whether they want to have arguments or discussions or anything like that, meetups or anything like that. I think that just benefits the hobby.
Yeah, and I, some people will love and enjoy this conversation. Some people want to see pack openings, right? Like there's plenty of ways to love and enjoy the hobby, and it doesn't mean that anything is sort of bad, or should be shamed, And I do think that, when there's lots of people in the hobby, there can be that impulse to be like, your way of doing it's wrong, right? It's sort of that gatekeeping thing of like this is the right way to be in the hobby. This is the right way to collect and to think. This is the wrong way. But a lot of this stuff to me is just natural growing pains of hobbies that have a huge amount of brand new people in them. And by the way, like most of these content creators that are sort of like leading these hobbies have been doing it for like a year and a half to 2 years to 3 years, some like 4, 5, 6 years on YouTube. That's nothing. It is exhausting to run a YouTube channel for that long. It is definitely, it takes a lot of commitment and work. But when you think about it from like a really long-term perspective, if these hobbies really last for a very long time, like a lot of these guys who are like 50 and 60 and 70 that I talk to at these shows who have like a lot of wisdom, they're not on social media. They're not sharing their ideas. They're not sharing their perspectives. And so you also have to give like a lot of us making content. We're like in our 30s, we're in our 20s. Like we're young. We're going to make more mistakes. Probably we're going to have more life lessons that we need to learn. So I think that's all part of the growing pains as well.
Yeah. And if I can add to that, I'll say like, there is no right or wrong way to be in the hobby. Everybody can do whatever they want as long as they're enjoying it and as long as they're part of the hobby. I think that's a good thing, and in terms of all the content creators out there, yes, a lot of people are very young. A lot of people probably have not been in the hobby that long, me including myself, right? I'm not like an OG, content creator or hobbyist or myself. I come in and out of the hobby over the years, but this is the kind of innovation and growth that we need. We need people who are dedicated enough to have YouTube channels and make content and things like that. Because like you said, all the OGs that have been in here for a long time, they're not interested in doing that. They come from a different generation. Yeah. And whether we like it or not, we have to acknowledge that content creation is what has changed the game. Being able to bring that type of exposure and bring people in where they can search something on YouTube, they can get educated and they can get into the hobby rather than whatever they used to have to do back in the day, buy those old magazines or go into an LCS or something like that. That has really changed the game. So that's why I feel like we, even if there's people out there that are making like content that I'm not interested in, like it's just it doesn't help the overall goal of exposure by having a lot of criticism and infighting within the community, the content creator space, right? Like the more content that we can put out there, the better, as long as we're steering people generally in the right direction, as long as there's not like any bad actors or scamming or fraud or anything like that, we can definitely call that stuff out. But everything else, I mean, there's definitely room for everybody to put out their opinion, put out their content. You don't have to watch it. But for a lot of people, they find entertainment value out of that.
For sure. So I know you might want to leave soon. You'll let me know.
Sure.
We could take some questions,
Yeah.
maybe engage with the chat a little bit. If people want to ask questions about this conversation, if people want to ask questions about anything to do with any of the hobbies that we engage in, anything to do with, what we do in the hobby, what we think. We can talk a little about the market. We can talk about other things. So I'll give you guys a second just to start asking some questions, and I'll.
Yeah,
I'll
I can hang out for another, like, let's just say 25, 30 minutes.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. I'll remind you again, 25 to 30 minutes.
Okay.
Let's see. Yeah, so feel free to ask Pokemon questions, and if you'd like as well. But also you can ask your wrestling questions, your Star Wars questions, anything you'd like to ask. And then if you don't know the answer to like a Pokemon question, feel free to pass.
Okay, sure. I'll make it up.
I'll definitely feel free to share your opinion. Yamamoto says, will Pokemon ever have an event as large as the Sports National? Millions moved in that room daily. What's your opinion on something like that? And I'm going to broaden this to, how about, will non-sports ever have events that can rival the National, where it's 85, 90% non-sports and only 10% sports?
Is this for me?
Yeah. Yeah. What do you think? We'll both answer. We'll both share our opinion.
Okay. If I have anything to do with it, guys, yes. Yes, it's going to happen. And I'll tell you why. Because pop culture was definitely had a presence at the National. And if you pay attention, you'll see it. Okay. So here's where a lot of people kind of like have a misconception, right? They'll look at Marvel cards or Star Wars cards, and they'll look at it in that specific niche. Like that's all it is, just like Star Wars collectors, Marvel collectors, anything like that. But you have to look at these things as cards. Cards. Like we all love, Pokemon, right? We love Pokemon, or your viewers love Pokemon, right? But we don't see this as a card. We just see, we don't see this as Pokemon. We just see it as a card, like a Pokemon card. And that's where a lot of people have this misconception is we have to understand that we as collectors in this hobby space, we view this card as a form of collectible, right? But we just don't understand it. We just look at it in terms of the IP. So when you look at like Star Wars, Marvel, wrestling, for example, you're just looking at the IP. But you have to understand that we are card collectors. And when we kind of remove those niche lines that are drawn, like sports, non-sports, alternative sports, all that stuff, the National will become a card convention. That's what it needs to form into. And you're seeing that with some of these companies like Zero Cool, where they're investing into pop culture IPs. Like the Zero Cool booth, they had what was it, like Stranger Things, very popular TV show, Stranger Thing cards that they were debuting there. It was lines from the opening of the doors to like midday. There was lines around for people to try to get those cards, and that's what it's going to be too. That's what it's going to be. Like we have to get more exposure where we get people who come in who view cards as a legitimate form of collectible, and they're buying whatever IP they love, whether it's sports, Pokemon, like TCG, or pop culture stuff. Like when you go to Comic-Con, for example, I don't know if have you ever been to Comic-Con? It's not just comics. It's comics, it's posters, it's art, it's toys, it's costumes, it's also stuff, right? They don't narrow it down to one niche item. They narrow it down to the IPs of everything that they love. And I think that's what the National will evolve into, right? I mean, it's kind of like that right now in terms of sports, because you can get like memorabilia, you can get autographs, you can get, other things like that. But once we start to bring in more alternative cards into the mix, you're going to see more people come in. And believe me, the people that run the National, they're businessmen. They want to make money. So they will be very open to letting all that in. But it needs more exposure. It just needs people to realize that it's cool to collect Marvel cards. If you collect comic books, if you collect toys, then you should be collecting Marvel cards too. And that goes with all the other IPs also.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm you and I have the same mission. I can tell you that much about, and that's I'm particularly working on it. So like me and my buddies are like Collecticon is sort of the big event right now, the biggest event for Pokemon basically. And they're pretty huge. I don't know if you've been to Collecticon. Have you been to one
No,
yet?
but I might go next week. It's here in Long Beach, which is I live in Southern California, so
Yep.
it's here in Long Beach. So I might go just to kind of check it out.
Yeah. No, it's really good. And, I'm going to bring a lot of Star Wars and Dragon Ball Z, mostly Pokemon, but Star Wars and Dragon Ball Z. So I vended a couple of them. And a bunch of us are going to Denver. And so, yeah, I just think that Pokemon is such a natural touchstone for so many of us because we collected that as a kid. But I think that the more you're engaged in this and do this, the more you realize that like you're also a huge Harry Potter fan and a Dragon Ball Z fan and a Lord of the Rings, and you really enjoy collecting cards, and it's fun sort of, broadening out. Now, Pokemon is so vast and there's so many cool things to collect and there's so many eras that for people who have like only been doing it 6 months to a year and a half to 2 years, like it's definitely a personal decision whether I want to start putting my funds into like these other things outside of Pokemon. And obviously you shouldn't do that if Pokemon's your favorite and you haven't, in my personal opinion, and you haven't really met your goals or gotten to a point where you're comfortable there. But I would say, at least from my perspective, like I enjoy all of it so much. And it's really been rewarding to get outside of just Pokemon for me personally. And it's made me appreciate, yeah, a lot of different things and just connect to a lot of different nostalgic things from my childhood. So
Yeah. And to maybe give a more focused answer on this guy's question here, I did get approached by a lot of people asking me for Pokemon at the National. When I was set up there as a vendor, I
mhm,
did have a lot of people asking me about
sure.
Pokemon. I just didn't have those cards. So I could definitely see Pokemon having a larger presence there because I don't think there were many Pokemon dealers there. But if there was like one guy, like you, for example, if you had your setup there and all your cards, you would definitely get a lot of business there because there are a lot of
Oh,
crossover collectors that enjoy sports and Pokemon and things like that. We just haven't really merged those two communities yet. But I
yeah.
think a goal for you is maybe you should try to set up like your a mini exhibition, Pokemon exhibition, art museum, whatever you want to do at a big sports convention at some time, and just get the feedback from it.
That'd be fun. That'd be fun. And I know a number of people in the Pokemon community would be into doing something like that with me. I do think part of it is a price thing. Pokemon collectors are generally, and Pokemon collectors are just generally not as rich as a lot of the sports guys. And I mean, even the National is very, very corporate because it's so expensive to set up there. And so that is also part of why, Collecticon, we can get our tables, 200, $250. What's the National, $2,500 or something a table?
No, it wasn't that expensive for
Oh,
me.
wasn't that?
I was able to go. So here's how the national works. There's
Sure.
everybody has like their spot, right? That they've grandfathered in over many years.
Mhm.
They charge $1,200 for a booth, I think, that has like two 8-foot tables. Twelve
Oh,
hundred dollars.
that's better than someone told me. Someone told me 2,500 for that.
Well,
Okay.
what people well that's for like depending on if you have like a different type of setup. Like I know my friends in the Breakers Pavilion, they were paying that
Mm,
amount. But what people
okay.
do is they sublet spaces at some of these. You're not really supposed to do that, but people do that and they charge whatever they want to charge. So, the prices they are more than like $100 table at a regular show, but I mean the amount of exposure you get is it's probably worth it if you can pay what it's supposed to be. So it just takes a little bit, like you have to kind of know somebody, know people to kind of get the fair prices. But it's possible. I mean, I saw, um, do you know Don Diego? I saw
Mhm.
her there, and she's really big into Pokemon, right? Like is she one of the main Pokemon content people?
So she's doing more YouTube now. I
Hmm.
think she's focused more in the past on definitely Instagram. Like but I know her. I went to her trade night. I actually met her for the first time. We hadn't met in person before, but like her brother was like in my Patreon. So I've, talked with him and got to meet him there in person. And they're definitely very well connected and very engaged in the Pokemon world. The YouTube space is kind of interesting. But I don't want to speak for Don Diego, but I think her plan is to try to grow her YouTube and put more focus here as well and be more involved
Yeah.
in sort of the
So
conversation.
I think you'll see a larger growth on the Pokemon side, especially
Yeah.
again if they can build value into those cards and people see value in them, then you're going to see a bigger presence for sure.
Yep. So we have a question about wrestling. This is where I know zero, actually
All
zero.
right,
This is
I got you on this one, Jake.
any other sport. I probably know some about this. I know zero. So go for it.
Okay, let me see. Let me read this
I'll read
question
it.
here.
Would like to hear some about wrestling cards. I love pro wrestling, but I have no idea on the market and where to begin collecting. And Aiden, definitely should go subscribe to Great Curator because I'm sure he talks more he might talk more about it there. And I know Merle Wright is super into
Oh yeah. Me my partner Merlin, we love wrestling. We haven't really got into a lot of focused wrestling content yet, but it's gonna come, guys. I promise you. Like we're so focused on Star Wars right now, but wrestling is the next wave for us to discuss. Wrestling is great. Like I would say, if you want to know where to collect, go with what you like. Okay, whatever wrestler you like, whether it's the older wrestlers like Hulk Hogan, Macho Man, back those guys, go collect their cards. Or if you like the new guys, like if you watch today's wrestling, like Roman Reigns, Brock Lesnar, guys like that, go collect that stuff. And the best way to start is by buying the guys that you like, and start off like with the low end stuff. You can get like the modern stuff, like the new WWE, for example, cards made by Fanatics. Like you can buy those boxes relatively cheap. They're coming out with select WWE now. They just came out with Revolution. The Prism stuff is way down, so you can start collecting that stuff. And as you have fun collecting it, you build up your tolerance to spend more money. Right? You kind of mentioned this, like you said, like a lot of people don't have money to collect Pokemon cards. The way I kind of look at it is it's all based on tolerance, right? Tolerance to spend money on something, whether you see value in it or not. When a lot of people get into collecting, they might look at a card. I'll just use this for example. Okay. Let's just say this card is, I don't know, $500, whatever, right? They might look at this and like, I'm not spending $500 on that. That's like a car payment, right? I'll spend $10. I'll spend $10. And as they get into it, they'll say, okay, this is what I get for $10. What can I get for $50? What can I get for $100? Right? They build up their price tolerance and they get into those more high-end items because they can see value in what it is, right? So same thing when you start with collecting. Start out with the low stuff. Just kind of dip your feet in it. If you're okay paying $40 for a box to rip, or $40 for a card, or $50 or whatever it is that you want to pay, then you can work your way up. And believe me, that's when the fun part starts. That's when you go down the rabbit hole of collecting and you're like, okay, this is the new stuff. What's the old stuff? Let me go back into the 90s and collect the sets from the 90s. Let me go back to early 80s and collect the 1982 All-Stars and things like that. And then you start making connections within the hobby, and then you start to connect with people who are more knowledgeable, and then you can ask them questions. What's the key set to collect? What is this guy's rookie card? What are the iconic cards that you want to collect and things like that? And you just kind of build up over time. What you don't want to do, don't buy for profit. Don't buy to flip cards or anything like that. You're going to get burned if you don't know what you're doing. Start collecting first, and then build up that knowledge base and that tolerance to spend money.
I agree with all of that. The one thing I will add, the only language that makes me slightly uncomfortable for someone, if someone hears it this way, which is not the way that I think you mean, like there's certain, like, depending on your specific financial situation, like you maybe shouldn't build up a tolerance to spending $100 or $200 or $500 or $1,000 on an item. And I think also short-term success does not mean repeatable. So you might buy something and then if the market's hot and happens to go up and you might flip it. And then you might get sort of an overconfidence that you're going to be able to continue to suss out the next thing, continue to flip it. You might take bigger and bigger risks, and you might, and the fact that you're spending more and more money now might numb you a little bit. And the reality is, like, you just have to be aware of that. And part of that is like, spending within your means, not having FOMO, and patience. Like there isn't that rush. I think that, and now with the serialized stuff and the super rare stuff and the super expensive stuff, like there can be this feeling, and some of it is justified. Like a collector's going to get this card, this 1 of 1 that I need, or this 1 of 5, or this 1 of 10, particularly with the serialized stuff. Or in Pokemon, it's trophies or PSA 10, low graded first edition WotC or level X or middle generation stuff, like some of the rarest stuff in Pokemon as far as set cards, and then trophy cards, which have very low print numbers. There can be that feeling of like, if I don't get it now, someone's going to put in their private collection. That can happen. The good news is there's always going to be another trophy. There's always going to be another 1 of 1, 1 of 5, 1 of 10. So I think it's about, I agree with everything that you said. And I'm going to add just like, there's also like the patience, and have fun with it. And just as you said earlier, like, you don't want to get into a position where you're stressing yourself out, where it's not fun because like, I'm in the hole. I have credit card bills to pay. I'm $20,000 into debt. I'm upside down on this card. I'm paying interest on my credit card bill. And I like, this just sucks. And this hobby that is so fun and had the potential to be so fun now sucks a lot because I jumped in right too quick. And now, if that describes you out there, like, you're definitely not alone. First of all, that happened to a lot of people this year. It's natural for that to happen to a lot of people in this type of like mania intense sort of market. And with just like patience, you can correct it and probably hopefully slowly start making better decisions and slowly gaining sort of that self-discipline and control. It doesn't mean you need to like leave the hobby forever necessarily. Some people probably do need to take a break, and addiction is very real, and that's a very personal thing. But those are just some things that I think about. But I definitely agree that like, when you are starting something and you don't have a lot of knowledge, starting small, starting with the most modern stuff, getting that, watching as much content as you can, getting engaged in as many conversations, asking these types of questions exactly the way you're doing to someone who is knowledgeable about this, is definitely the way to go.
And if I can just clarify that, add again, guys, don't get into the game to make money. All right. If you get it, everything that you're saying is true. If you have the mindset or the objective to get in this game to make money, don't do it. Easier ways to make money out there. Okay. Get into this for collecting. And as you start collecting and you learn the game, then you can participate on the other side where you can buy, sell, trade cards, because that is a component of the hobby. Buy, sell, and trade. Right. But don't solely do it for profit.
And I think that's fair to assume that the people who are likely going to overspend the most are going to be those people who are just looking to flip rather than those people who are collecting. Although that is not necessarily always the case. And I've talked to a lot of people who just became so obsessed with collecting and basically just spent themselves into very difficult positions. So, but I agree with you that where you see the most leveraging is when people are buying these like $15,000 cards on credit because they think it's going to go to 25,000 or something, or they see Star Wars, like they see you with the Kurosawa. They saw how you like made a quick flip, whatever it was, 5,000 to 16,500 or something. Do I have those numbers right? Something like that.
Kind of.
Something.
I got lucky, guys. I got lucky. Okay.
They see that and they're like, oh, Star Wars is going to balloon and I'm going to get in there and I'm going to make that sort of thing. And the truth is like, that stuff absolutely can happen. And the reality is these cards can do that because there's so few of them and because it only takes a little bit of interest to make that go up. But like, it can also like be worthless and crash. And you could buy at 5, like you buying at 5 was a risk for sure, because no one had ever paid that much for a card like that from a set that I think was only $100. Like that's not a premium product. And those are reprinted arts. Like that's an art that already was printed. Now this is a 1 of 1 version of it, but like you paying 5,000 was a risk, right? For that card. Now someone paying 15,000 for that card is a risk, and it's a bigger risk. Now, could it also go to 100 grand? Could it go to 60 grand? Like it's a 1 of 1. Like if people want it, if people really value it and desire it, those types of things, can be whatever two people agree, that they can be. But when you speculate on things like that, first of all, they can be difficult to sell because you actually need to find a buyer who has $16,000, who has $20,000, $25,000, $30,000. There may not be that many people. And then you have to have people who are willing to take a risk on a 1 of 1 sort of item like that, or who just really want it. So you just have to understand, just as you said so well, like once you have practice and you understand the games and you're in a financial position where you can take some risks. I do things that are highly speculative and risky and may or may not pan out sometimes, but I'm aware that like they may not go up, or I may be paying the highest amount ever for this card, or these types of things, and I'm comfortable with that because I really enjoy it. So
Yeah, let's talk about that for a second because I'll give you some
Please.
insight into that deal. Okay.
Yeah, please.
So when I bought that Kurosawa card from my friend Merlin, okay, he bought it for $500. He found it in a shoebox
Mhm.
at a card show in Atlanta. He bought it for $500, and he put a price tag way higher than that, 10x, $5,000 on that card.
Yeah.
When I looked at that card, to me that card is more valuable than what he had it at. Okay, but he actually gave me a deal. He sold it to me for like 3,800, I think,
Oh,
something
okay.
like that, which is still significant profit because he only bought it a week before. So he went from 500 to 38 in a week.
Yeah,
Okay,
for
and then
sure.
I held on to that card for like almost 3 months. I graded it, and I did all that stuff with it. But the value in that card comes from telling a story so that people see it. They don't just see it as like, okay, it's a 1 of 1 from 2021 Topps Chrome Star Wars, right? They look at it and they have to understand the significance of the artwork, the artists involved, the history of when that card
Mhm.
first came out. And when you tell that story, you build value into that card, and then you just have to find the right buyer. So that's what I kind of talked about earlier, like our very long conversation here, where we talk about building a community of collectors, right? I had no intention of selling that card. I had a crazy price on it. And some dude just really, really wanted that card because he heard the stories that was told that was attached to that card. The guy who bought it, his name's Daps, and
Yep.
he knew exactly he knew who the artist was. He knew where the original painting was. He knew the significance of why that card was special. And he came to me and he just made me an offer that I couldn't refuse at that time. I had no intention of selling it. I would have held on to that card for a year because I knew that I could build the value in that card by building the community around it. But it just happened a lot sooner than I expected. And it just kind of accelerated everything from there. But that's why you have to collect things that you like, because then you can find really rare cards that nobody else knows about, and if you can see the value in it and you understand how to build the value through storytelling, building the community by promoting it and exposing it to other people, then you'll be able to hopefully get big wins like that.
Yeah, and everyone is gonna have my point in saying that is like that absolutely that can be a case of that you really like it, you see that it's undervalued, you think it's really cool, you think it has a really cool story, you understand something that no one else understood. You saw this, the Galaxy set is a I mean, the amount of amazing art, and the amount of like great, famous, historic artists in sort of the Star Wars universe who created the art, for that set. Now, of course, the art's been used many, a number of times, but this is the first time we've ever had these rare versions, these serialized versions. Oh no, actually, we had serialized versions in the 2000s. What's the set? That were serialized, but they don't have the different like patterns on them. Like because there are serialized versions, I think, out of 25. Um,
Yeah, so the other Star Wars sets, the difference is they put like a different color stamp on them, and then some of the more rare ones are numbered. So there's that, but it's just like a different color stamp.
what was the set though? What's the set that has these arts that has the arts, but the that just don't have the
The chrome
like colo patterns? Yeah, what was the set called?
that doesn't have the chrome, like the
There's an
paper
earlier
version.
Galaxy set that has a bunch of these arts in it that are numbered, but they just don't have like the reflect the patterns. I'm just blanking on it right now. I actually have some of the cards from it. You know what I'm talking about
I'm
or no?
not sure. I'm not sure.
That's all right. The point is that a number of the arts from this set have been serialized before, but not as cool looking, not as beautiful in more of a plain way. Um, anyway, the point just being like you saw this narrative, you saw this story, and I mean that card is amazing. I mean, it has a bunch of amazing Jedi. It's a really cool art. Like I think it's sick. So
Yeah,
uh,
and then let me just add to that too, guys. It is not easy to sell cards. It's very hard to sell cards. So
yeah,
just don't think that a card has an automatic value attached to it, and that you're going to get that value from it. Okay, there's a whole art of buying, selling, and trading that you have to learn over time. So just kind of understand that part. It's very difficult to sell cards.
let's see. Um, and what I'm just telling people, I guess, about the Star Wars market is this is my personal opinion, and this is where like everyone's gonna have different opinions. Like for me, the Galaxy set is overvalued at the moment. Like, I'll just be honest with you. The Sapphire, the Galaxy, the things that most people are aware of, most of the attention is on. And the stuff that is the easiest crossover from sports, like Sapphire, is the stuff that for me, and again, it's not saying that necessarily the market's going to ever agree with me, but me as a collector who's very engaged in these cards, like, I think that like cards like, I really like, let's see. It's very personal, right? But I like the Topps 2018 set. I was talking with like Ali from Titan Games, and she like doesn't like the 2018 set. So it's like she prefers the new 2022 set. And so the point of me saying all of that is that because we didn't collect these things as kids, there's going to be a lot more narratives that are going to be created, and there's going to be a sort of shifting dynamic in these hobbies of collectively the people involved deciding value on various items, and everyone's going to have their own opinions and come out with their own sort of narrative of, oh, I think this is the best set and should be worth the most. I think this is the key card that should be worth the most. And I think that that's all natural and part of the discussion that happens. And that's what happened in Pokemon, by the way. Why do you think the Pikachu Illustrator is the most valuable card? Why do you think some of these trophy cards are very valuable? It's because there was a lot of debating and narratives created, and people saying this one should be the most expensive, people saying this one, these hobbies have conversations, and things sort of fall into place in terms of value over a long period of time. What's important to understand is because the Star Wars hobby, Marvel, these types of things don't have a lot of sales history and are newer, and a lot of new people are flooding into them, there's going to be more ups and downs, and there's going to be more things that probably correct, move up, move down, move up, move down. So you have to expect those types of swings, and because that market's going to be a lot more volatile than even a market like Pokemon that just has a lot more sales history, a lot more people understanding the values of them, a lot more comps, that type of thing, sports, etc. Anything to add to that, or do you agree with that basically?
Well, let me talk about the two sets that you mentioned specifically,
Sure.
Sapphire and the Topps Chrome.
Sure.
So I think the Topps Chrome is significant because it's very appealing. All the artwork in there is very appealing to a broader range of people. That's the consensus opinion or feedback that I've been getting, right? But I think with Topps Chrome, it started out at like $125 box, and then it steadily rose over time where it peaked at like 200, and it stayed there for a while. And only recently has it come up to like $600 a box, or wherever it is right now, 650, right? But it grew over time. And when people were opening cards and you were pulling out the really valuable superfractors and things like that, and they were kind of floating around and they started to transact a little bit, that's when the value started to kind of grow a little bit more. And that's why I think Topps Chrome the value there is probably more sustainable than Topps Sapphire, for example. When Topps Sapphire came out, I think it was like $800. No, $800 a box, $700 a box, and then the first week or 2 weeks,
very quickly,
it jumped up
from 500 to 800 to 1,000.
Yeah, because the breakers were opening it and they were pulling out the cards and all that stuff. And as some of the big cards get pulled, the box values go down because people are flipping it, right? Those cards are beautiful. I love those cards. I want to get into collecting that set, but to me, they are also overvalued right now based on how quickly they went up. Whereas Star Wars Chrome, it went up gradually over time, over the course of maybe a year and a half. It went up. Only recently, after my Kurosawa sale, it did pop up like a lot after then, but it still was like $350 a box, $400 a box at that time. So, but it's more sustained value because again, the collector base is growing based off of that. Well, you're not necessarily, I haven't seen it where a lot of people are necessarily flipping a lot of cards. The cards that are transacting are going into hands of collectors. So once they get bought up, you don't necessarily see them on the market the next week over or anything like that. Not yet.
So here's some of the weaknesses. Let's do a market talk about this stuff because it's interesting to talk about for sure. So here to me are the strength. The strength of the Sapphire set is that it's reprinted art from 1977, and it's the first time they've done serialized versions of those cards. And certain collectors, particularly older collectors who have money, are paying like crazy bounties for some of their favorite, black onyx, whatever, red, et cetera, et cetera. The fact that people are paying so much for the base versions is crazy. I was seeing people pay $150 for graded versions of just some of the base the base card, you know, when you look at base card for almost every other product is worthless, like worth zero. So, you know, amazing sort of prices. You saw some of those black ones go for like, which is the one of ones, go for like 20,000, 25,000. I saw 5,000 on some of the reds from some of the key characters, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of hype. That's sort of the positive of a set like that. For me, it's actually a negative because I don't like those arts that much. Particularly, I prefer sort of these concept arts and these interesting, you know, drawings like in the Galaxy set, or I prefer just like straight on personality cards rather than having like a scene in the background. I like just having my like favorite character with a pattern. Every person is going to be different though. And this is the issue, is that too often, in my opinion, people follow what influencers and what creators think. And they hear an opinion and they're like, oh, that makes sense, I should do it, right? And so it's part of why it's important, I think, for people to hear a variety of opinions, and that helps them figure out what they really like the best. So with the Galaxy set, here's the weaknesses to me. Too many key cards from a financial perspective. It's very hard to determine in a set like that what card should be the most valuable. Now, the Kurosawa has become and is right now at least the most the most valuable card in that set. There's a good argument to be made, like it's just sick looking, you know, which is obviously subjective, but like I happen to agree. And that it has a bunch of these characters on it. You can talk about the artists, right? Some of the artists being more famous, some of the specific things being more famous than others. But usually in Star Wars, right, the key character cards are going to be the most valuable, or the key signatures. In a set like Galaxy, it's difficult because Darth Vader's on like 15 cards, right? Because a lot of these cards have Luke, Darth, you know, and then it's very subjective because it's like, which art is better? Well, that's something that's highly subjective for people to sort of decide over time. And so because of all of that, it makes it so rather than there being like 5 key superfractors or 5 key, 10 key superfractors that a set might have, where it's character based or autograph based, a set like this, it's sort of like they're all, so it'll be interesting to see how that works out over time. It'll be interesting to see if like the superfractor prices can retain value because there's so many and all of them you'd think would be fairly valuable. Whereas like, when I'm buying like the gold one of ones in Topps Finest or in Masterwork, it's like people really are, I'm buying the Yoda for $500, $600. And then I'm buying like, a random character who was in half a scene for like $80, and that makes perfect sense. Whereas here it's a little bit harder. So it's how can a whole set retain that type of value? The question will be, as more of these come out, as more people try to sell them, as more are opened, will it be able to sustain price? Should be interesting to see. And then will this continue to be sort of the key set? In my opinion, I go away from sort of what people have talked about, and I try to go to the stuff that like people like you or like nobody's talked about, not because I at all think that you're pushing this, or showing it or whatever, but it's just because most people have now first been introduced to this product, to Sapphire, because loot box and is opening at these types of things. Now, Allie, from Titan opens up all the product, and she has quite a large audience, and a lot of people have seen the stuff through there. But from a market perspective, I'm always trying to look at, first of all, I trust sort of my own sense of like what I think is cool, right? And then second, I'm sort of looking at, those types of positive and negative arguments. Now, will any of that, come to fruition? I own probably 30 or 40 cards, from the Galaxy set. And I'm a big fan of the Galaxy set. Now, I was buying them quite a bit before prices really went up. And just for transparency, I have actually been selling some into sort of the price movement up and putting them into other Star Wars cards. But what are your feelings about all of that? And do you agree, disagree? Do you think that this Galaxy set is going to be like the key set in Star Wars going forward if the hobby blows up? Or do you think some of these other things like Masterwork with the thick cards, or some of these Top Finest sets, or even high tech, which I think is very undervalued in my opinion, and people, if the high tech 2015, 2016, 2017, the acetate cards, like there's just so much stuff out there that feels like it hasn't been talked about, it hasn't been appreciated quite yet by maybe the audience that's starting to get into this. I said a lot. What do you think?
Sure. Well, I mean, here's the thing. Like, let me give you my personal opinion about why I really like the Chrome set.
Yeah.
I opened those original boxes because you could get a refractor in every pack, which I thought was really cool, right? Like with the Sapphire, for example, like you only get two color parallels in the
Mhm.
whole box, and the
Mhm.
rest are going to be, base cards. So for me, the I was initially drawn to the Chrome set because it was a fun rip. Like you could get a refractor in every set. But I think what's really great about the Chrome set, the first year Chrome set, is because they basically cherry picked and curated the best artwork from the last 30 years. Most people don't know this, but they've been making Star Wars Galaxy cards since 1993.
Mhm.
Okay, they have like eight or nine different sets over the span of like 30 years. So
Mhm.
they curated and picked the best ones, the best 100 cards for this set, plus another 20 bonus cards and things like that for this set. And the reason that you gave about like it being very subjective and how can we pick out the top five, that's what's great about this set, because every card in there is subjectively valued by whoever really loves that character. Like 5 Darth Vader cards, which ones are the best? We have to have that discussion. There's cards of like Ewoks, and there's only Ewok set collectors out there. There's Jawas in there, and there's only Jawas collectors out there, right? A lot of people are having discussions, and that's creating a lot of attention for that set, which is great. That type of exposure is what's making this set so desirable right now. And whether, my opinion is valued by other people or not, I think that the market, the overall collector market, has deemed this to be like one of the key sets out there. They've been making Star Wars sets since the 90s, right? Like you said, all the legacy, the high tech, the paper galaxies, they've been making these sets for like the last 30 years, but none of them have really broken out except for the original 1977 set, the 1996 finest, and I would say this one are like the three key sets that have really broken out and got a lot of attention. So it's a good thing that people are having that discussion. I don't think that you can say that any card has a set value to it. It's all very subjective to the collector base who want that card. That's why I think that with the Star Wars Galaxy Chrome, that they're going to have a sustained value, because they built up such a reputation, and everybody has their favorite top 5 cards or anything like that from that set. So it's a good thing that it's like a loaded set basically, and it's a good thing that they made it like that, because that will continue to drive the interest in that set versus having like Masterworks, for example, which is something that I love to open up. I open up like 10 boxes of Masterworks, but they're not going to have that sustained value, because there's only going to be a small collector base for that, and unless they get a bunch of exposure, that base is not going to grow. So key sets are always going to be determined by the amount of discussion or attention that can be
Right.
drawn to it.
I think the reason people are talking about that set is because of you guys.
Me?
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
actually,
yeah,
I
yeah.
think the reason people are talking about that set specifically more than others, yes, it's beautiful. Absolutely. Like, I think people are, it needs to be a combination of things in my mind. You need to have beauty. People actually have to like it. People have to get it. Like, part of the reason why this set does so well with a lot of people is because and some people, like, they don't want to collect the movie cards. They don't want the movie. They don't want to see, Mark Hamill. They want a drawn version. They want an artistic rendering, and they prefer that, and they're drawn to that. That's absolutely. And this is going to be probably your best bet right now. Like, it's your most premium kind of cool product that's going to deliver that sort of thing. But I think the reason people aren't more into high tech and aren't more into masterwork is because nobody's talking about it, and no one's showing it that much, and no one's talking about it in sort of a market, sort of perspective, in my personal opinion. And I think that if Star Wars were to succeed, or Star Wars were to get a larger collecting base, and it was actually like became a sustained sort of thing like Marvel, I think you're going to see those cards move up way more on a percentage basis than anything in Galaxy, than anything in my opinion, than anything in the Galaxy set or the Sapphire set, based on the prices that they're already at. Not saying that those prices are, this is my opinion, right? Not saying that those prices are way overvalued, but more that the other stuff is just way undervalued, in my opinion, because of a complete lack of people can't see it. And because the booster boxes are insanely expensive compared to the singles. So your expected value is so much worse on Masterwork, on High Tech than it is on this set or Sapphire. And part of why people are opening a lot of it is because you actually can hit cards and you can actually make your money back, particularly in Sapphire, particularly early on. Whereas this, I could pull a 1 of 1 and lose money. That Phasma box, that Captain Phasma box where you pull that 1 of 1, you probably lost money on that box. And you hit a pretty key character in a 1 of 1. Imagine that. If you hit a 1 of 1 of any card, of any fairly key card in this set or in Sapphire, yeah, I want to buy that from you, by the way. We have to talk about it.
So
So that's crazy. So when we talk about a $400 bottle, thing of Masterwork, and that a key 1 of 1 like that of a top 30 or 40 character is only selling for what, 250, 300, 400 bucks, somewhere in there. You might want to you might think you might want to try to get 1,000, which you should. But if you threw it on auction, I can tell you for a fact, on auction right now, that would get like $250 to $350 based on the current market. So whatever. So the point just being that you're spending $400 on that box, a 1 of 1 is that, versus you can hit 1 of 1s of like this. If you hit a 1 of 1 of this is probably selling $5,000, $4,000. So and there are a bunch of 1 of 1s you could hit that would sell for multiple $1,000s right now in that set, despite the booster boxes being nearly the same price. We're talking about $150, $200 difference. And the Masterwork also has autographs. And so it's very weird. It's very interesting.
Okay. So I think that all your points are valid, and I would agree and support all those points from that perspective. But here is where this is what I want to emphasize. We are having 2 different discussions here. Okay. From your perspective, you're talking about it from the market perspective.
Yes.
If I open this box and it costs $600, what are the likelihoods of me pulling a card where I can make my money back? Right? Is this card going to be worth, whatever the box card is? And if it's not, it's not worth it. It's overpriced. That's the discussion that you're having, right? On your side.
My point is just that, why are the booster boxes able to sell for that much while the cards are so cheap versus some of these other sets? That to me shows a temporary mark. And my explanation of that is because people really like to rip cards, right? And that's where you get these situations where, like, expected value should always generally be below, of course, on a booster box if you're actually going to open it. But when you get these extreme examples, usually it has to do with one of 2 things. Either the product is bad and people just don't like it, which might be your argument. I know you're not arguing that it's bad, but you might be arguing that it's just inferior in terms of like people just aren't going to like Masterwork as much ever. Like, it's just not going to be as popular. I would argue that it's beautiful, actually, that it has a certain cleanness to it. The thickness of the card, the way it's set up, reminds me of like very expensive sports cards, to be honest with you. And I just think it's because no one has said that. Like, no one talks about it. No one states that opinion. No one states that they think. I've never heard anyone talk positively about them. But to be fair, you're the only person I've seen, and this is just me also not being super into the community at all, who's like talked about it at all, like any of this stuff at all from a market perspective. And I might be wrong about that, but publicly at least.
Okay, but you're still saying that. So you're coming at it from the market perspective again. So you're saying that with this Captain Phasma, for example, right? You put a price tag of $250. That's what your estimate on this is. You're thinking
that's what it would sell in auction. So $250.
Okay. So you're already putting a number on it, but you're saying that a 1 of 1 of a character of this, notoriety should be like whatever it should be, like $1,000 or whatever, or the price of the box at least, or something like that, right?
Relative to the box, you'd think that it would be like $2,000 maybe even. Now it's hard to differentiate, because part of the value of these boxes, a big part of it comes from the autographs. And this is also a debate in the Star Wars community. Should people like the autograph better, or should people like just the character card better, which is a whole nother cool thing. And again, my point is just that it's interesting to see these discrepancies financially, and that I think we're way too early to be stating strong narratives about what people are going to like in the long run, in my personal opinion. So when you say it's already been seen that, and it's been demonstrated that this set is going to be like the most popular, I say way too early, in my view. And that's coming from someone who has a lot of it. It's not coming from, I'm not trying to like
Sure.
push one up over another. I have a lot of all this stuff because I like a
Okay.
lot of it. Yeah.
So the way that I look at this is like you're basically assigning a value this based on what you're paying for the box, right? And you're taking that perspective. When I buy cards, when I open boxes, I look at this from a collector's value. Okay. I realize that outside of our space, our collector space, nobody would even give me $1 for this. Like if I walked around on the street and say, "Hey, would you rather take $20 or would you rather have this?" Everybody would take $20 unless they're a card collector. Okay.
I
Because
don't think so, but that's another thing.
I mean, you
I
saw
think if
you saw
I think if I told
yeah,
someone this is the only version of this in the world, it comes out of a
yeah.
$400 box and it's 1 in 700 boxes to pull this one of one. It's the only one in the world. Do you want this or $20? You might have some people taking the card, but sorry, I'm just being difficult.
I feel like most people who don't value collectibles, they're gonna take the cash. They're gonna
Okay.
take the cash. Okay. Let's do it a more extreme example. $500. No,
Then I
no, that's more than this. Let's just say $100. $100. Okay. You say
sure.
this is worth
I'm
250.
just being difficult. I get your point. Your
Okay.
point is taken. Yeah, yeah.
Most people do not value cards. Okay.
Sure.
And so when you take the perspective that this has an assigned value already attached to it, I think that's when you can start to view things that way, where you look at a box that costs $500 and you start thinking to yourself, if I open that box for $500, am I going to get $500 worth of cards that I can resell and get my profit back and maybe make more? And I just don't have that perspective. Okay. I take it from a perspective like I see things that I really like. Okay. And I get into it and I see it based off of supply and demand again. If there's enough of a
Mhm.
community that will compete for that card, that's where the value comes from, right? If I really, love Captain Phasma and I talked about Captain Phasma all the time and I can create that demand organically from the exposure of this, then that's where the value of it comes from me. So that's why I think that the Topps Chrome set is special because, like you said, there's a lot of subjective conversations about people talking about which card is the best, where the character is, and the more exposure that this set is getting right now, and it's not just from me, but like just from everybody else involved, that's where the value of it comes. And as long as there's sustained interest, then that demand will hopefully grow over time, and that's where the value will grow also, or at least sustain. Whereas a set
Yeah.
like the Masterworks, for example, I opened 12, 10 or 12 of these boxes on my channel for like a period of like a whole month or 2 months or something like that. I was
Mhm.
showing these cards off, but there weren't much interest in these cards. And because there's no demand, that's why the value is where it is right now. So for us as collectors, we
Yeah.
have to find things that we're passionate about, and then we have to give the attention and exposure however we want, have those fun conversations about what is the best card, why it's the best card, tell those stories. And that's where the value of it comes from me. So I think that we're talking same topic, same discussion, but we're just coming at it from two different perspectives, where you look at it from a market perspective where there should be some type of assigned value based off of what this card costs versus what we could get for it today. I come at it from a different perspective of this card will have value based off of the demand on the story
It's the same,
and interest that can be generated.
but it's all supply and demand.
Mhm.
There is nothing other than supply and demand.
Where
That's
does the demand come from?
that's my point. The demand came from, I think, you guys, and came from the really high sales. I think a lot of now, is it also, if none of that had happened and none of that was made public, I definitely don't think these cards would be selling nearly as high as they are. That I honestly like
No,
I
that's
don't.
true. That's true. But that's what
So,
I'm saying.
and
Like,
if I started talking more
yeah,
about this with my following and started showing it, and I was telling people the one of ones I was buying and how much I was able to resell them or how much I've already made, like there'd be a lot more people looking at it. There'd be more interest and there'd be more people buying it. And because, in my personal opinion, all of these cards have aesthetic and story merit and there are certain strong points to each thing. So when we were talking before about like the strengths of Sapphire versus the strengths of Galaxy versus the weaknesses, that is a discussion about the fundamentals of supply in a lot of cases, but also the fundamentals of demand around, is this item going to be historic, right? Demand has to come from somewhere. So demand comes from a few different places, right? Demand comes from influencers, from attention, from people being aware of something. Demand comes from the aesthetic quality of the art people's experience of the card, and then demand comes from the historic sort of like importance of the card to them in their lives or to the overall hobby. So for example, in sports, rookies, in a lot of these types of hobbies, like first appearances in comics, first appearance, right? That has nothing to do with the art. The art can be crap, but if it's the first one ever, it has that history, that importance to that character, that right. So demand can be broken down in different hobbies into different categories. In my opinion, Star Wars is so it's Marvel, I think, is also very raw. Pokemon's so raw. I mean, I think there's going to be a lot of changes in Pokemon too, but to assign value and say that this set should be more valuable than this set this early, or to say that you think that this has been driven up by organic demand and because you showed this like 15 times on your channel, but you never showed a high sale, it didn't go up in value. Like I view those as very different things. But will this be the most popular set, and will this have the most high value cards? I'm not saying that isn't going to happen. I'm just saying that I think it's way too early to assume that based on just the current demand trends, because I think the current demand trends are very small, very niche. Again, there are very few cards of these. There could be 50 guys who are super into this set who had the money to buy out some of the high ones, which raised the entire value of everyone's cards. The market demand and the depth of that market may not be that deep. The market demand for all this stuff may not be that deep. It's sort of a time will tell sort of situation. And how this conversation, I know this is a Pokemon channel, but this conversation I think applies to any sort of how markets are developed and how markets are grown. But I am talking supply and demand. Everything is supply and demand. The supply side has to do with the price of the box, right? Because it doesn't make sense to open. Are people going to crack it? Is the supply going to get out there? And then how much does it cost to actually get the card originally? All factors into what I would expect the price point to be. But all of that is supply and demand. Now, you might disagree with my assessment of the demand, right? As I talk a ton on this channel, demand is the hardest thing to pin down. Like, where demand comes from. Is it because people really like it? Is it because someone told them to like it? Is it because their friends like it? We're very social creatures, and we're very easily sort of swayed by everyone's opinions and by the consensus and collective. And it's just a very hard thing to map. Supply is an objective, right? We know the exact rarity, we know the exact pull rate, all that type of stuff, which is why it's easier to start with, in my opinion. Which is why I talk so much about like the numbers of the masterwork box versus the cards inside versus the difficulty to pull the one-on-one, and yet it's still selling for that low despite the box. Like that is persuasive to me on the supply side. And then the demand argument I'm making, and then I'll let you go. The demand argument I'm making is that these cards to me have been under pushed up. Like the other Star Wars cards, I don't think have not gotten nearly enough attention. And I think the Galaxy and the Sapphire have basically monopolized and gotten all the attention, not because they're just objectively better forever, but because like they are very cool, and because that it just sort of the momentum started there. And that's the one you happen to get, and that's the one that you happen to show. And again, I do not think, I swear to you and to everyone here, that you have manipulated or pushed this market in any one direction. That's not what it's about. It's more just about analyzing what I'm seeing. And I believe that a decent amount of the price activity is based on that, and that the people I'm talking to are focused in on certain sets because that's what they've seen sell, and that's what they believe and have been told is sort of the most valuable. That's just my perspective. Yeah, please.
I agree that the amount of exposure that I have personally put on it through my niche following has definitely increased the values based off of that exposure. But the demand that I create for it is not from the same perspective that you're talking about. You are talking about demand based off of profit, right? You buy a card, what is it valued at? What money can you make off of it? How much can it appreciate in value? Okay. And I've been telling, and I said this before earlier in this discussion, that we have to shift the narrative from profit first mentality while we're collecting to collecting things that we love first, that we're passionate about. Everything, all the content I make is based around creating demand for collecting, right? That I give exposure to the things that I love most. I tell people why I love it. And if people agree with me, they follow it. If they don't watch it. Now, there are going to be some people that will have that profit first mentality and, can't control that. But
Yeah.
that that comes from the passion. Okay, the exposure that I give this set comes from the passion, and that passion can transfer to other sets too. It can transfer to Masterworks, it can transfer to high tech or whatever it is. But this is just like what we're focused on right now because it's a great set, right? Objectively, is it the best set ever? I'm not going to say that, right? Because everything is
Who
subjective.
knows?
Like I said before,
Yeah.
it's an argument. It's an argument, or it's a discussion that we have to have whether this, set is great or not. But that type of exposure is what's driving the demand for this. Now on your channel, maybe you have a lot of people that talk about the economics and the profit of buying, selling cards. But I'll just tell you from my perspective, all the interactions that I have, it's based off of a collector base where people are getting into the cards because they really love it. They're buying it, and if they appreciate in value, they can flip it and they can do that, which I don't think is a bad thing either. But that helps everybody as part of it. So that's why the discussion, like we're talking about the same thing, same topic, right? We're just having it from different perspectives, and I think that's where the disconnect is. All right.
So,
So if you ask me
yeah.
if this is the best set ever, if they were not to make any more Star Wars cards, forever, right? And they ended it with what they have right now, I would say yes. It's top 3 best set ever based off of my opinions for that. Now, will the values stay there? It depends on how much we build a collector base, which is what I was talking about earlier. Like if we talk about it all the time and we get more and more people in every year, the values are going to continue to grow. But if the collector base or the demand kind of stayed where it is, yeah, it's probably gonna fluctuate. It's probably gonna be volatile, things like that. That's why I think the Sapphire kind of scares me, because I think a lot of people got into the Sapphire from the perspective of trying to flip those cards, and that's why you kind of see the prices go, a little bit more volatile versus the Galaxy stuff, where people are more like collecting it, and once they buy it, it kind of goes into their collection and you don't see it anymore. Now that can change, obviously. Like if you see 100 auctions on Golden Auction, that's definitely gonna probably kill the market for that stuff. But hopefully the collector base will be strong enough where people aren't dumping everything on the auction sites.
So 2 things. So 1, I still don't think we're talking about 2 different things because I still
Different perspectives.
I don't think so.
Mhm.
And again, this is my perspective, is that we're actually talking. You view that the demand for that the demand that you've created for this is based on people just really liking it, right? I'm saying I don't know. It could be that because they like it the best, or it could be because they think it has the best upside potential because they saw you turn $3,800 into 15 or 16,000, and then Daps made a video titled like, could this be worth 100,000, right? So like, which does put money front and center, but like that's a separate thing, and that doesn't bother me at all. It does put the money message pretty front and center in a title. It also is literally doesn't bother me at all, by the way. I'm actually not disagreeing with you in the sense that I believe you that every person you've talked to, you feel like they're buying it because they really like it. Okay. And not because they're trying to flip it or resell it or whatever. I'm in agreement with you. But I think they would really like this stuff too if you were showing this to them as well, and if they were seeing this being sold and out there more. So my point is not so much that this stuff necessarily is being flipped more or shilled more. It's more that just because this got the most attention over these other sets, in my opinion, and talked about the most and talked about in those videos, that's why they've seen a higher price. That a lot of the demand has come from that. Now, do I know that? I could be completely wrong, right? Like the reality is that maybe people have seen all of these different types of cards. I have a lot of different, we can look at, here's like the high tech stuff, and they've looked at all of them and they've said the best one is this one. And that's why it's the highest price. At the end of the day, I really don't know. It's why demand, I think, is hard to nail down. But as someone who isn't trying to make money necessarily by flipping to take it out of the hobby, I'm always trying to make money so that I can continue to grow my collection and meet my collection goals. So I would rather buy this before it goes up a lot if I think that this is going to remain at the same price. And
Okay.
not because I'm trying to flip or make money, but just because I'm making a market assessment that I think that it's better to buy these now because I'm worried they're going to go up more. I could be wrong, right? Than buy this right now because I like both a lot, right? And I want to have both eventually, but I'm worried I think this one's more likely to come down in value, and I think this one's more likely to go up in value based on sort of my assessment of both the demand side, which we've now talked about, and the supply side. Do you see? So I think we're
Yeah.
having this discussion. We might just, I don't even know if we disagree so much as you might just be very confident that that the demand for this set is very sticky and more sticky than these other things. And so your assessment is just because the demand is so high for this set, you think it's going to continue to hold price and do better in the long run because more people are wanting to collect it and being engaged. And that I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yes. And I will say this. I
Yeah.
think that if I can draw a comparison to like sports cards, for example, there are certain sets that have gained a reputation that kind of stand out from the other sets. Like in sports, for example, like Prism is considered like one of the top tier sets
Mm-hmm.
out there, and a secondary set or a lower cost set would be like Select or Revolution or Optic, things like that, right? So I think that to me, the way I look at these sets, these Star Wars sets, is I feel like Topps Chrome being the first year they did Topps Chrome for Galaxy.
Mm-hmm.
And if they continue to make it, right, if they make a Series 2 Chrome, Series 3, and they sustain that, that's what will be special about this set. And it will probably stand above the rest based off of the sales history that's already been created from that. Now, that's not to say that these other sets that you're showing, the Masterworks, the High Tech, the Paper Galaxy, all those things, maybe the demand for those will rise also. But I think that's speculating a little bit, because in order for that to happen, and it will happen organically as people get into collecting those cards. You can only collect so many. There's only 100 of them, right, in the base set and the refractors. They will look towards the other things because that's when they go down the collector rabbit hole and they will look at these other sets. But I think that that's a little bit of speculation, right? If you're looking to buy this Masterwork card because you think that it has a greater chance to go up in value, again, you're speculating based off of profit. What you have to do is kind of just look to see and collect the things that you like. And I've said this before, nothing in the hobby makes sense to me. Nothing in the hobby makes sense, right? Like one day this could be a $250 card to you. Maybe she becomes the next main character. Or she comes back to life in the movies and she's the next badass character. And then this is like a $2,000 card or something like that. Nothing really makes sense in the hobby. It's all driven by emotional passion for collecting and things like that. And that's where the demand really comes from. So I try not to speculate on where I think like card values are going to be. I just know that, based off of the collector base that has already focused in on this set right now, Topps Chrome, I don't think that's going to go anywhere because of the interactions I had, the feedback I have. They haven't been flipper or profit based. They've been more collector focused. And that's why I think with a strong foundation of collectors supporting it, I think the values will still be there, And the
Yeah,
other thing too.
I'm not looking to flip these cards.
But you're assigning a value to it, is what I'm saying.
I think they're extremely undervalued. But
Yeah.
you just assigned value to this, saying that it should be the most expensive set of all time because it's Topps Chrome, which is also speculation.
Based off of what it is today. Like when that first set came out, I didn't think that it was like going to be what it is today. But it grew over time.
It is speculation to say that something that is the most expensive now will always be the most expensive. Now you might think that that's more likely or better chance speculation than saying something that is less expensive becoming equally as expensive. But we're still speculating on future value of these items. And the reason it's important to speculate is because we only have so much money. First of all, it's fun and interesting and entertaining to talk about this stuff. Like I just think it's fun to think about what might happen. But second, I have a certain amount of money. I could buy one superfractor in this set, or I could get like a bunch of one-of-ones from these other sets. I like both of them evenly. Why would I get just one superfractor instead of a bunch of one-of-ones from a set that I like better? And if more people felt the way that I did, then the prices would start to equalize and creep up. If people do not feel the way that I do ever, and they just continue to prefer this, then it won't. And we'll see. And I can tell you, even from just being around 6 years, narratives shift all the time. Demand, just as you said, demand is so hard to predict. And when the way you put it is like nothing makes sense or things are crazy or this or that. And I would say that things do make sense and they do have narratives, but that those narratives can be quite temporary. And you illustrated it beautifully. What if they make that the main character? What if a big collector starts talking about this? What, a specific set or a specific character? What if Logan Paul and these guys start getting more, Steve Aoki and all this stuff start talking more about Star Wars and getting more into Star Wars publicly, right? And talking about specific sets. Like, all of that will have significant impact. Is it all speculative? 100%. It's very speculative, but we don't need to tarnish that speculation with that, like, that's bad, or that's how you're trying to make money. It's more like everyone is speculating, in the sense that we don't want to overpay for items because we only have so much money if we like both items. Now, if I hated this item, but I thought it was going to go up in value, and that's why I was doing it, then I would be buying it just for money, right? Then I would be buying it because I thought it was like a better flip play. But if I like both and one is cheaper, why wouldn't I buy the cheaper one and have sort of the rationality that I have? Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes. Sorry, my daughter just walked in on me, so we'll have to wrap up this conversation soon. But let me end it on this point.
Please.
Hold on for a second. Let me take care of this. Oh, okay. I'll be out in a second. Okay, so I will say this. This is why this conversation is interesting. This is like us having a debate about who is the GOAT: Michael Jordan, LeBron, Kobe. I'll throw Kobe in there, right? It's a conversation, and this is why I say it doesn't make sense, because we're talking about a hobby, collectibles, right? Mm-hmm. And these things don't really have set intrinsic values. It's all based off of the person who's willing to pay X amount of dollars for it. So this discussion that we're having, it's part of the value that comes into these cards. You know what I mean? And like, you may be right. Like, the cards that you're showing may be more value. It might make more sense to get like 3 1-of-1s of a different set versus one superfractor of that. And we can have that debate and all that stuff, right? But that's where the value comes in. It's like, who can make the better argument about what has more value to it? And, will this conversation continue to happen, across the hobby for years to come? Who knows? It just depends. I don't know. I don't really try to overthink it that much, to be honest. I always approach things in terms of a collector base is what I'm trying to say. Like, I have this card, whatever it took for me to get this card, that's what I paid for it, right? That's my cost basis. And for somebody to get it off of me, they're going to have to pay my price, whatever I'm willing to give it up at that time. I don't necessarily think there's an assigned price for that based off of whatever the market is. I know, like, a lot of people will try to comp cards out and things like that. I don't really necessarily believe in that method of valuing cards, but that's kind of how I look at it, right? And there's nothing wrong with what you're saying in terms of how you believe that there should be a certain return on investment in terms of whatever you're spending, and you've got to make those decisions, whether it makes sense for you to buy Star Wars Galaxy versus Masterworks versus High Tech or whatever, individual cards or anything like that. That's just all part of collecting. And that's what people have to understand, that it's very, 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 very subjective, right? A card is only worth what it's worth to somebody who's willing to pay for it at that time. Nothing really has assigned values. And what I try to push is that people should not assume things have assigned values or assume things are going to go up or down or anything like that, because that's not how our hobby works, because everything is very, very subjective based off of who values it. Does that kind of make sense?
Yes, but it's not all random nonsense. There's a reason why the biggest IPs have the most expensive cards over time. There's a reason why the most popular characters and the characters that are featured in Pokemon, the characters that are featured in Star Wars, have the most value. There's a reason why Darth Vader, Luke Skywalker, Han Solo, like the key characters in the show, why their cards have more value. So I agree that it's highly subjective, and at the end of the day, it's just what someone will pay. But there's a reason why someone will pay a lot for one card versus another card, and that has many factors involved. And so we can't go as far as to say that like value investing in general is a real thing, and you can value invest in cards. And if you are thoughtful about it, you will likely do better than someone who's just doing it completely random, because these cards do have value for reasons to people. It's not just complete nothing. That's just what I would say. So I would imagine you would agree with that, and just as you said, you think this one will have the most value because it's the first Topps Chrome, making it with the Galaxy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it has like the famous artist in it, right? We can give reasons why we think certain things will be. So I'm going to let you go. It's been such a pleasure. We should definitely like talk again, hopefully, and hang out and keep the discussion going. I'm sure you and I could talk endlessly about this stuff because we both enjoy it so much, clearly. So, but I want to make sure you get back to your family as well.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, it was a great conversation. I definitely enjoyed this kind of like long form discussion about these things because I don't think it gets discussed enough. I think a lot of people try to like romanticize the hobby and all aspects of it sometimes, and so it's good to have like these back and forth discussions where we can kind of share our opinions and things like that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I really appreciate you taking the time and the back and forth. And I'm sure I'll see you again in person at some of these shows, and we'll definitely say hi. And hopefully, yeah, we can have another conversation and do some more content. Maybe I'll invite you in for a panel or something in the future if you're interested in. And I'm sure you and I will both be collecting Star Wars and talking about it and showing it. And I think it's good.
Definitely. I appreciate it.
All right, dude. Take care.
Yeah.
Bye-bye. All right. So, very generous of the great Curator coming on and hanging out with us for this long. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the chat. I've been looking at the comment section and been laughing to myself because you guys have been debating different Pokemon things while we've been talking about Star Wars, which was funny to me. But to be expected. We do have couple super chats here. Appreciate that. As always, really appreciate the support. And if you can do me a favor, guys, and if you can go show your support for the great Curator, just kind of spending, taking this time to spend with us. If you can, after the video ends, just go and subscribe to his channel. I would greatly appreciate that. And I also would greatly appreciate if you guys would subscribe to my channel, as I'm working to try to get to that 10,000 mark, which would be very satisfying. So if you can help me get there at all, I, really greatly appreciate that as well. And what else? More content coming soon, as always. I will be traveling a decent amount over the next few weeks. So I will do my best to get some content out there for you guys. I do want to make some more effort to continue to bring on new voices, new people from different areas of the hobby, even outside of the Pokemon world. I think it's really interesting, and it's really great to hear people from outside of our world talk about these subjects. You guys can let me know what you think. Again, like, I'm always going to have mostly Pokemon people on and have mostly Pokemon discussions, even though the last couple of weeks we've had a decent amount of non-Pokemon stuff. But I think it's good. So, I will not be at Long Beach, unfortunately, but I will be at Denver Collecticon. So for those who are going to Long Beach, I know a number of you are. I hope you guys enjoy it and have fun. I am hoping to do maybe a panel soon with a few people. What else? And I'm hoping to do another live chat where we bring where people from the audience can come on and talk as well. Can we have a Yu-Gi-Oh show guest? We can definitely bring on some Yu-Gi-Oh guys. Yeah, I want to bring on I wanted to bring on Yu-Gi-Oh too for a while because I haven't watched his channel in a while, but I was a big fan of his channel like a year ago when I was watching it. I hope he still makes content. I really liked his arguments and the type of his perspective. So it'd be great to bring him on. And then might do a special stream. Not special, but this weekend, Saturday night maybe. So look forward to that. But YugoTube still does good, so maybe I'll reach out to him. Yeah, he's really cool. I agree with you guys. I really like his channel. Go subscribe to his channel too. All right, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. Really appreciate it. And I will talk to you all again soon.